We're live, people. How is everybody doing? Let's wait until I see some comments in the comments section indicating that we are, in fact, successfully live. Okay, if I look tired, I think I look okay, but if I look haggard, I'm starting a 1-week trial tomorrow. And I think I'd rather go to the dentist for 5 days straight than to go do a trial. But if anybody's wondering why I'm doing this now, I'm in what we are referred to as an impleaded third party in this trial. So in French, it's called a mise en cause. I'm representing someone who is only indirectly, potentially concerned by the outcome of the trial, not a party, not a defendant to the suit, but someone who might be interested or affected by the judgment in the suit. Hence, we are an impleaded third party. So I've got to sit there and do nothing pretty much except for look pretty for a week, and I'm not good at doing that. Oh, anyhow, and also we have these new restrictions in court, so it's going to be, I think it's going to be my first time back since the My Sharona Cyrus. We haven't used that term in a while. It's going to be my first time back. Apparently, we're allowed up to 50 people in a courtroom now, based on the new government dictates, but we're not allowed, like, obviously approaching witnesses. We don't have to wear masks in court, but we have to wear masks outside of the courtroom, and we have to disinfect. I'm not looking forward to it. My wife made me a power drink, which consists of carbonated water and trace amounts of, what's the word? Cranberry concentrate. Tastes terrible. All right, so anyways, that's it. So I'm figuring out how I'm going to do the vlogs while I do this. I think I should have a good hour for lunch every day. And to the extent I don't eat lunch to begin with, I can shoot in my car from the courthouse, edit when I get back, and at least get 3 vlogs out next week. Oh, so that's it. Let's see here. I'll just say hi to some people because I can bring up some of the chats. Hey there, everyone. This is from DOS Box Mom. My lawyer, hubby, and I are looking forward to Viva Barnes' latest stream. Thank you very much. We got Peter Doran, former lawyer and do-it-yourself plumber, also looking forward to it. A lot of plumber. For anybody who doesn't know, I have a second channel called Viva. Oh, my wife made me change the name. And not maybe. We changed the name to Viva Family. So VIVA Family. And today's video, I was trying to clear a drain pipe to release trapped carp in a swamp in the townships. It was from last week or 2 weeks ago. Anyhow, it was a little, it was tough to do. And we got 2 carp out, but some of them died. And I think the city's going to come in and take care of the rest of them. So let's hear what we got here. We got Dubster Brian says, Viva Fry, do you know about the Sullivan of Uber arrest? It happened at the same time as Steve Bannon's arrest. No news coverage. I don't think I know that. Okay, now that I see some super chats coming in, let me just get the same rules out for every live stream. Thank you very much for any and all super chats. I'm going to try to bring them all up. I do my best, but I'm going to miss some because it's just the way things have gotten. So I apologize in advance, but don't get mad. And if you are going to get mad if I don't get to your super chat, don't give the super chat. It is to show support, but not a right of entry into the conversation, because sometimes it's just difficult to get to them. Then they all just get off screen with all the comments, and I can't go back to them to find them. So thank you very much in advance. Let's say Jason Minard says, say hi to Christian S. He is your biggest fan. Okay, I will. I don't know who that is. I see Barnes coming in. We got Joshua Cornelius, Carpe Diem. Yeah, there were so many jokes about that video with running across the street with a carp in my hand. Like it was a good 20-pound carp. What else do we got? So let's just bring up the last of the super chats. I missed one already. Here we go. WJ Dad says, please discuss absentee versus mail-in ballot. Let me screenshot this and other issues. USPS blockchain, collection box reductions, overall purpose of each side. We've got a number of things on the menu for tonight before I bring in Robert, who looks dapper yet again. On the menu, I've posted it up here, so I'm looking behind. Millie Weaver, update. We're going to just talk about a few things, lingering questions that I have. The Bannon indictment, because it's an interesting topic. Not so much interesting. Well, I know Robert has a different opinion on it. I think more interesting than the Bannon indictment is all the other unnamed charities that don't get this level of scrutiny. Kleinsmith plea. We're going to try to talk about Michigan, the decision in Michigan that just came down, split decision, and I think I know with which side I tend to agree. Some interesting stuff in Virginia, and then we'll do the absentee ballots and some other stuff. Could Apple and Google claim that Fortnite developed Epic Games was banned from their stores because the Tencent ownership stake? Okay, I'm going to have to screenshot this as well, and if we can get to it, we'll talk about it. Robert is in the house. Everybody share the link out just because sometimes YouTube notifications are 12 hours late, which is no good for a live stream. Do separate super chats, square up videos. Oh, and I'll bring up your super chats. I just may not read them out loud to the extent that it's not always easy and it's not always feasible, and sometimes it just interferes with the discussion. What camera do you use for your chat? Looks very good. It is a Vitade, Vitade plug-in USB camera. It's actually Nate Brody, other YouTube lawyer, sent it to me, and it's amazing. And I'd like to thank in advance Kurt from Uncivil Law, who is one of the moderators, but moderation on this channel is very much hands-off. It's only reserved for the Russian sex bots, for spammers, and for people who, violate some radical rules, which we have never set. Okay, with that said, 6 minutes in, let's bring in to the stream Sir Robert Barnes.
Hey, how goes it?
Very good, and yourself?
Voila.
Okay, you can hear me?
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Okay, amazing. And everybody, audio is good for everybody. Video is good for everybody. I'll let everyone say what they see.
I got to get one of those fancy cameras too.
I tell you, if I could take a picture of it, I'll take a picture of it just to show you what it looks like. Try not to get too many notes in the back. This is what it looks like. This thing up here. It's a nothing camera. What I think I need to up my game is to get a mic like yours. Your mic is very high quality.
Yeah. I had other people get all this.
All right, so Robert, let's first of all, any news on your front legal that you want to share with us or that you are able to share with us?
Nothing really, no.
Okay, good. And I'm gonna get through these super chats and we're gonna get right into this. Love me, my super chat is important. Little Jimmy, you are loved. Thank you very much. Good to see my two favorite YouTube lawyers. Saborium, thank you very much. And let's see here, Robert, can you share what is next for your Portland 2A case that just lost the appeal? This might be a good question.
That's talking about Michael Strickland, which we mentioned last time. So before all of this, Antifa took off in the public consciousness in Portland over the last several months, it's really been an ongoing problem. And a couple of years ago, a young journalist who's he's on the spectrum, Michael Strickland, little guy. You can find him at Laugh at Libs. He has a whole good description of the background of his case, and we may go into more detail in a subsequent subsequent show because it's worth going into greater detail. There's no immediate update at this stage, so essentially we'll be taking it up to there's a Oregon Court of Appeals petition for rehearing. Those are very, very hard to get. Unless, of course, you're on the wrong side of the political equation in the D.C. Circuit. But most likely we will be going up to the Oregon Supreme Court. Oregon Supreme Court doesn't have to take the case. So it's a bit of a long shot, but still in the game. And maybe the current environment in Oregon will re-educate the Oregon judiciary about the problematic aspects. The short answer is he's a guy who'd been beat up before by Antifa types, by people aligned with Antifa and Antifa tactics and techniques and ideologically, because he had filmed them doing stupid stuff. So he was like a grassroots journalist. He would, and it was called Laugh at Liberals. That was his, YouTube show and his Twitter handle, Laugh at Libs. And he was good at it, but he was just a little guy, and after he got hurt, beat up, he realized he needed to learn how to defend himself. He did. He went and got training for how to defend yourself with a weapon, got a right to own a gun, and they were going to group up and attack him. They'd been planning it out on a given day at a big protest, and they started to approach him, and he, while stepping back, took out his gun, showed it to them, and put it away exactly like his training told him. Instead of any of them being charged, he was charged with 17 felonies. His trial counsel didn't understand how to handle political cases. I didn't hear about the case until after the conviction had already occurred. So I took the case up to the Oregon Court of Appeals. There were some errors that were tough to raise because the trial counsel had not preserved them correctly, which could be a subsequent habeas issue, but that's further down the road. But there were clear evidentiary errors in the case. They'd mistakenly let it be a bench trial when that shouldn't have happened, despite juror bias. Juror bias was reasons to move it out of Portland, not have a judge decide the case. He was never going to rule it in his favor. regardless of the law, frankly. And the Oregon Court of Appeals ruled against us. They only partially got the issue, but the practical reality is that the Oregon courts have been, as people have seen on the federal side, have been very ideological. I mean, when you have a federal court judge ruling against federal law enforcement, protecting his courthouse, it gives you an idea of how political and ideological they are. These are people who are ends justify the means people. When you have federal judges on the side of rioters and looters, that gives you an idea of how bad the political environment is in some of these communities. And Oregon is one where it's really bad, particularly in Portland. And also, of course, the place where it's worst, which we'll get to later, is the Southern District of New York. And that includes not just the federal district, that includes the Manhattan DA, and that includes the state attorney general, all of whom are in Manhattan. Effectively. I mean, there's some of them are supposed to be up in Albany, but they don't really operate out of Albany politically, even if it's so functionally. So that's the short answer. So yeah, we are going to continue to fight that case because it was the first, before McCloskey, before the Quiznos case, before any of those, was Michael Strickland. Michael Strickland was the test case to put somebody in jail for trying to defend himself from trying to prevent the weaponization of the mob. Because a weaponized mob doesn't work if people fight back. That's the reason why they went after the Proud Boys. Not coincidentally, guess where? Where do they go after the Proud? Oh, Manhattan. What a shock. So there's problems with that case too, by the way. There's been a complete misapprehension of it. Joe Rogan has a complete misapprehension of it. A range of people do. So we'll get to some of those in a later. We'll probably do an episode that gets into all the Second Amendment cases together as one separate episode, which will be Michael Strickland and the rest.
How much did he get sentenced to?
We got involved by the time of the sentencing issues where we were in an advisory capacity, and the judge ultimately realized that it was going to become a higher profile political case in a different direction. So he mostly, I think he got time served. I think it's an extended probation time period. But original conditions of his probation, by the way, was that he not be allowed to practice journalism. So that gives you an idea of the insanity.
I imagine even if it's probation, would that have an impact on his ability to own a firearm or continue to own a firearm?
Potentially, because it's a felony conviction.
Okay, that we'll have to do something like distinct and separate on this, and
it deserves its own breakdown, its own context, its own history. And people can find out about it by going to Laugh at Libs. Michael Strickland has put up a lot of videos giving the whole backstory, giving the backstory of what's happened before, what happened at the scene, the whole video of what you see at the scene. But it was the beginning of the politicization and weaponization of prosecutorial process in order to protect the left's weaponization of the mob. That case and the Proud Boys New York case were the cases that were designed to prevent people from trying to defend themselves. So they need to concede to the mob, take a knee, literally and figuratively.
All right, amazing. Now, someone also asked what you were smoking, but Sir Barnes, when you were not smoking $200 cigars, do you have an economic preference?
Yeah, so actually what I have today is a Tatuaje Monster cigar. They put out a special edition every year for Halloween. It's a very affordable cigar typically, $10 to $15 on average, and they make fantastic cigars. And their Monster cigar, they call it Monster out of Halloween, is one of their best every year. So that's an excellent cigar. I always recommend.
Okay, excellent. Before we get into the first subject of the day, let's just bring this one up specifically for Robert. If I gave you the power, how would you change the laws or procedure to change malicious prosecution or selective prosecutions?
Completely get rid of qualified immunity entirely. So it's one place where I agree with the left. But the difference is the left only wants to take it away for police. I want to take it away for all politicians, period. The government should be held to the same standard as everybody else. The idea that they should be above us and beyond us when they, in fact, if anything, there's an argument for holding them to a tougher standard is nonsense to me. And most abuse cases are all about corrupt prosecutors. The rogue police officers stay as rogue police officers because of rogue prosecutors. So they need to be sued far more often and far more frequently. Right now, it is practically impossible to bring a legal action for a prosecutor. Even if they knowingly withhold evidence, hide evidence, bury evidence, lie about facts, doesn't matter. Almost nothing happens to them.
Amazing. And now, speaking of which, I think it's a good segue. Let's deal with Millie Weaver, because there's been an update since our last stream, which was the disclosure of the secret indictments revealing what the charges were, what it seems to have stemmed from. I guess first things first, for anybody who doesn't know, Millie Weaver is a journalist, independent journalist. She does contract work for InfoWars. I was corrected on that. So she's not employed by InfoWars, but does contract work for them. Apparently, the day that she was releasing her documentary called Shadowgate, she was arrested. She recorded the incident. To say that it went viral and all coverage of it went viral, I think people were very interested in the story because people were making connections that you can't blame them for making, even if some of them panned out to be more or less on target. She is arrested, brought to jail Friday afternoon, in jail, with her husband until Monday morning. Apparently, Department of Child Protective Services got involved on the Monday. The secret indictment, which was released, showed that she was being arrested or charged with robbery because of an incident where she took her mother's cell phone and apparently pushed her mother to the ground because her mother was apparently recording conversations of her husband and her brother berating her. Her mother had come to live with them during the My Sharona Cyrus Schmendrick. So I guess, and now we see that the charges had nothing to do with burglary or theft of documents that were featured in the documentary. Totally unrelated. Coincidentally, it took a month to execute the warrant, and it was executed the day that she tweeted she was releasing the documentary. We'll get into that. First things first, secret indictment is a scary word for sealed indictment. All indictments are sealed or are private, right?
Kind of. So in other words, the grand jury proceedings are secret. But indictments are sometimes not sealed. It depends on the local jurisdiction as to how often they're sealed. So so on that aspect, the overarching view, I still see the cases like Julian Assange. It's just the first charges against Julian Assange, which were personal, meant to discredit him, meant to set him up for future extradition for future charges if they were able to get him through. And I see this is one of the most absurd examples of overcharging ever. Essentially what they've charged her with is assault during a robbery. This is a charge limited that's intended for people who are carjacking, for people who are robbing people in a bank, robbing people in their home. I have never seen someone in a family dispute be charged with assault during a robbery. It is one of the dumbest charges I've ever seen. So it's clear, it's extreme overcharging. The anomalies with the case include, first and foremost, that the purported victim filed an affidavit, according to her own words, of non-prosecution and asked that no prosecution go forward. I've never seen...
And stop there. In fairness, I think from that comment that she had only filed the affidavit for non-prosecution after Millie was arrested. So I think the timing on that might be relevant. Whereas I thought she had done it back in April. It seems that she might have only done it on the weekend where she was arrested.
Well, it appears to be two things. She told them back in April to drop it, and then it was just a family misunderstanding. She then accelerated to an affidavit once she realized they had gone forward. So they had no cooperation from her. She had told them not to go forward. There's two sides of the story, according to police reports. The other side of the story is that she has issues, and that she'd always had issues, and that was the other side. And once you hear the other side say, look, she has issues, and these issues lead to her to make up some stories that aren't accurate. And then she tells you several days later, don't bring the charges. I've never seen them bring charges in that case, least of all felony charges, that are intended for actual crimes, not family disputes. So there's that aspect. So part one is you have no victim. That's unheard of for the most part. Very, very rare. Second, you have an incredible time delay that has been completely unexplained. This happened in April. They get an indictment around that time. Then they get a warrant in June or July.
Yeah, July 20.
July 20th is when it's formally issued. They could have got it long before then. So none of that makes sense. Why they need an arrest warrant doesn't make sense. This is a summons case. Then they do it right when she's releasing the film. That is very peculiar timing. And then they hold her over the weekend to do the shock and awe routine, which is an abusive tactic that they rarely use. That people say it's common. It's not common. It's only used in politically motivated cases where they want to coerce people.
And this is the dialogue that's happening. Everybody's saying, well, all indictments are sealed, or secret indictments are necessarily secret. They do this all the time. It's overcharging as a prosecutorial strategy, so it makes them easier to get a plea of guilty to a lesser charge. I mean, people have these. Everybody has these sort of.
But
same
most of
back
that's
and forth.
wrong. Most of that's wrong. Is I mean, for example, with indictments are not always sealed. Sometimes, so particularly the local level, that's not universal. Now, I don't know the particular protocols in Portage County, Ohio. So what I had heard from people up there was that was not common, particularly in these kind of cases. I mean, usually sealed indictments are for high-profile cases where someone's going to flee, or as a mob case, or as a witness tampering case, things like that. That's the biggest anomaly, is that any charges are being brought at all, given there's no complainant, and given the facts are in dispute, and that this appears to be a very minor family dispute.
So
that's
to push back on that, because I'm going to bring up a comment from Jacob Walls. He says you can't drop a domestic case, and with good reason. Now,
not like this. That's incorrect. That's only when there's a dispute between. I've done tons of these. I was on the front line of doing domestic violence and abuse cases from the time that the order of protection laws were passed in 2000, 2001, 2002 throughout Tennessee. So I'm intimately well aware of what charges they tend to bring and don't bring. Had to study national protocols in other states for that purpose and that reason. And in that context, this is a dispute between the only ones where they're required to arrest are certain states between a husband and wife. It is not the case where there's a family. Any family member does not create this. If it did, they'd be locking up thousands of people every day in Portage County, Ohio. I guarantee you. So and that's true anywhere in the country. People get into fights and arguments all the time, including where something physical happens. And it wasn't clear. What she said is that she got pushed down. That's not the kind of thing they're looking for at domestic violence. That they're looking for, things like escalating physical violence, someone that's bigger and stronger against someone smaller. They not something like this where it could have easily been that she fell trying to hold her phone. I mean, so that's just problematic, where you don't really know for sure what precisely happened. Even it's not mandatory that they issue an arrest. And I would say to those people that say it's mandatory, well, why didn't it happen in April then?
Well, and that's the biggest thing, is that everybody citing the domestic violence as, these things have to be taken seriously. Police don't mess around with them because they always escalate, or they often escalate, and that's why they have to be treated so seriously. If that's the case, you don't walk away the day of, after having done your police report, concluding that you don't necessarily trust everything the brother's saying, who said that the mother lost her cell phone 2 days earlier, but they have text messages, whatever. You don't walk away the day of, and then to come back with the battering ram, quite literally, 5 months later. So that explanation rings hollow to me. I appreciate the domestic violence element to it, but that's usually interspousal, and in a situation where it's usually much more pronounced than a mother coming to stay with you and having a squabble that results in her, getting pushed or falling to the ground, and nothing comes of it the day of. If there's such a risk, you don't leave without doing anything the day of.
Yeah, I mean, my neighbors used to fight each other every day. They used to fight. It was like every other night they'd be beating each other up in the front yard. And so this is not normal to bring a prosecution in this case. And I know that part of Ohio, those kind of disputes are not uncommon. And so the idea that this is somehow normal criminal procedure is just not the case by any evidence I know. So so that's part one, is it's highly unusual that any charges are being brought when there's no victim, when there's a long time delay, and it's a sealed indictment, and that the charges are over prosecuted. Then you have the peculiarity of the timing, which doesn't make sense to me. So there's that part. I mean, the senator from Delaware, who helped put Biden's name in nomination, admitted to hitting his wife years ago. Nothing ever happened to him. That's just one example of many that I could point to. So and then you have the prosecutor, long-standing Democratic, well-connected political prosecutor, sits on the Organized Crime Commission in Ohio. I always tell people to pay attention to those, because look at what charges somehow don't get brought against high-ranking known organized crime officials in a state. That tells you something about those people operating on that commission. I'll leave it at that. Won't go into further detail. Let people figure it out on their own accord. So it's, in my view, however it's being done, it's either personally motivated or politically motivated. This is not being handled like a traditional case. It's not being charged like a traditional case. It's not everything about it, from the timing of it, from the fact they went forward at all, from the fact of what charges were brought, from the fact they did a weekend hold. All of it is bogus. And to give some example of that, it appears that they really thought they were going to be able to grab her kids. The court's reaction to this was twofold. One was to release her on her own recognizance, which tells you the court's looking at this wondering, why exactly are we here? Because you don't do weekend holds and sealed indictments and surprise arrest warrants for cases that they release the person on their own recognizance without having to put a penny of bail cash in, and they immediately release her kids right back to her, which tells you that DCS doesn't believe this is in fact normally they would almost always hold the kids in a context like this. They didn't, which tells you they believe that what is there. Those are two institutions, DCS and the courts, that are familiar with the norm, and they're reacting to this case like it has been greatly overstated by the way in which the decisions that they have made. So my view is it's politically motivated. I don't know if it's related to the film or not. They may have been more worried. Someone may have been more worried about what was in that film than turned out it was in the film. Who knows? But it smacks of what they did to Julian Assange. It smacks of what they've done to a lot of whistleblowers. Often whistleblowers are targeted, but they're targeted for some other activity other than their whistleblowing. In fact, as we'll talk about later, my view of the Bannon prosecution is similar in this respect.
Don't get ahead of us, Robert. Hold on, because that I'm going to have some questions, and I know other people are going to as well. Viva Fry, there was also the oddity that the officer did not show up prepared to arrest both listed on the warrant, had to call for transport. Yeah, I mean, another thing, I've never done this before, but do they not have to come with the warrant? Like, could she not have refused to go with them in the absence of actually seeing the warrant?
So for most people, to give you a background, when you have someone with no criminal history with a case like this, very light, somebody fell down and says they got pushed, and that's it. No other violent consequence. It's months old. The norm is you just give him an appearance ticket to well, that's what they call it in New York. A summons is what they call it in most places. And a sheriff would just show up, give him a summons, say, hey, you got to show up in court in a week or two. That's the norm. So doing an arrest at all is abnormal. Doing an arrest of everybody is abnormal. Doing it so that you can have a weekend hold where they can't get bail is completely abnormal in a case like this. And him showing up without either the warrant or knowing what it's even about is all unusual. So that means someone accelerated it and said, hey, go pick this up. We have an old warrant on it, without him even telling him what the warrant was or giving him a copy of it. That's another sign. And we'll talk about this in the Bannon case later. The most important thing I teach young lawyers or other people trying to study a criminal case is don't focus on what's in the indictment or what facts you know. Look at what's not there that should be there, because that will tell you a much bigger story. So here, the fact that he picked her up on a Friday, didn't have the warrant, didn't know who was supposed to be picked up, didn't even know what the warrant was about when the warrant was months old, that tells you a lot. That tells you somebody called him up and said, oh, we got a warrant. We need someone picked up. We don't have the warrant. Go pick her up right now. Why the rush? So something was AWOL. And is it a coincidence that that's when she was releasing the film? I have a hard time believing that. So it's possible. I just don't see it as more probable than not at this stage of the case.
I say that there are some coincidences that are just too coincidental to be coincidences, and we call them that because you don't have any definitive evidence to prove it. But you will not be able to credibly blame someone for drawing connections because, the timing is just too coincidental to be a coincidence. And what was I about to say? No, and so the question is it a local cop who knows who Millie has done work for and wants to stick it to anything InfoWars related? Or is it politically motivated? Is it just a system gone haywire? I've sort of written off the last option because even from the link that someone sent me of the recent indictments in and I'm saying portage just because I'm from French Canada, but portage. Even based on the first page of that link, because I couldn't get to the other ones, they were all pretty serious. They involved weapons. They involved drugs. They involved, like, I'd say, more serious things than what was known in this case, which was people during a lockdown fighting with their mother who came to stay with them from California. I mean, they involved more serious things. So I sort of come to grips with the fact that it's not par for the course. There is something else going on here. The only question is it just an overzealous prosecutor trying to make a name for himself? Or, other stuff which we cannot substantiate. But I think people should just know that it's not, there's nothing about it that looks normal, and trying to normalize it, I think it might be a sign of the times as well as relates to what people think of the prosecutorial process. But it doesn't look normal. Nothing about it looks normal.
And my instinct would be it's someone in the prosecutor's office because that's who went to the grand jury to get the indictment. And I would say a typical state prosecutor, particularly in a county like that, where you saw what their docket usually is made up of. when they see a case like this, their normal reaction is going to be, why am I wasting my time on this? I've got serious abuse cases. I've got serious violence cases. I've got serious drug crimes. I got organized crime activity. I got gang activity. This is what I'm supposed to, and I'm sure a lot of that domestic issues spiked that are much more consequential during the lockdown. So that's going to be there. And they're like, hold on a second. A mother said she fell down, says it was, by the point the prosecutor had it, according to the mother's word, they already knew the mother had retracted and said it was just a misunderstanding. I'm going to bring a felony indictment on this.
I read an article in Cleveland. I didn't actually see the police report, but it sounded like it might have been an overzealous police officer also was like investigating this the day it happened, like it was the crime of the century. Going out back with the brother. Why aren't there any footprints in the mud? If you say you came back here with the phone, I mean, to me, I've never been in law enforcement, and I've talked about this with Nate, and he feels a little differently. To me, this would have been like, hey guys, it's stressful times. Everyone forget about it and move on. It would not be like, if that's how it ended, coming back 5 months later with this. And Scuba Steve says Barnes is correct. The tactics used in this case is highly unusual. Great job on your show. Thank you very much. Yeah, so it is. I mean, the good news, I guess, is she was let out, got her kids back the same day, had dinner with her family. She probably will never let her mother back in the house again. Some people were floating the theory that this was all staged between her and her mother to promote the movie. Never will I believe that. Until
I can tell you, zero chance of that. Nobody risks going to prison to promote a movie. Not only that would mean she had the coordination of the prosecutor's office, the Democratic prosecutor's office, and the coordination of the police. Sorry, folks. The unusual part here is what the prosecutors and the police are doing, not what anyone else is doing. So there's no truth or validity to that.
Default username says, how can a warrant be served 30 days after issuance? Isn't the address and date time of validity firmly set when a warrant is signed by the judge? Yeah, I mean, that's another thing. Does the warrant not expire if not used?
It all varies. So a lot of arrest warrants, at least in the federal system, arrest warrants never expire. So it depends on the local jurisdiction as to whether they may have such a rule there. I'm unaware of it. But normally arrest warrant is outstanding forever.
All right. I think this is going to be a good segue, unless we have anything more to add on Millie.
Nope.
We'll see what happens. Next up, I mean, we're going to see if they actually continue to pursue the charges. They could, if they drop them, I guess that's a good question. If the police say, we're not prosecuting this anymore, how do we find out? How does that go in terms of a process?
Oh, they just drop it. And some smart prosecutors should, but we'll see. It may have been a preventative, like let's operate. What I like to do is operate from hypotheticals. Not like the DC Court of Appeals, but
yeah,
the
it's a dirty word on this channel now.
Exactly. But not like but more like when you're doing a trial defense, you have to say, okay, let's assume possibility X. Let's assume that's what happened. How would it flow out? What evidence would we look for? Because you have to do that when you're trying to prepare for any defense. And in this context, if it may have been, let's say it was politically motivated, they're worried about something showing up in the film that maybe did not show up. If that's the case, then they may drop the charges because their fears were not realized. If, on the other hand, this was, we're going to politically smear this person, period, and where we've pre-committed to following through on it, I would say the reaction of DCS and the reaction of the local court system is a warning sign to the prosecutors and the police, because they're saying this is not very serious and why are you wasting our time? By the terms of bail that she got, very low, 20 grand if she just decides to abscond, no cash at all. And there's a lot of reasons why those systems almost always require cash bail. Take a look at who contributes to prosecutors and judges getting elected in small counties and counties across the country. You'll understand why they require bail for pretty much everybody. Or watch a Ray Donovan season, the season from New York, where bail is a key component of what's taking place. To it to be basically zero bail in the state system, federal system, that's pretty normal. State system, that's very abnormal. And then the second part is for the DCS to walk away right away, when those people are always looking for excuses to grab kids 9 times out of 10. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the outcry, talking about the Showtime show Outcry. Both are huge signals that they're saying this has been way overstated. So it wouldn't surprise me if they drop it. If they're smart, they'll drop it. But you never know. How do you get a conviction when the mother gets up there and says it was a misunderstanding and she didn't want this to happen?
Well,
how do you get a jury conviction?
Thinking like a cynical lawyer, when the mother changes her story in the affidavit for non-prosecution to change what actually occurred, you not only have a non-cooperating witness, but you have one who's call it a hostile witness.
Yeah, and who's your only source of claiming domestic violence or robbery occurred here?
Yeah, no, it's well, and I do wonder if they were surprised at the media outcry it got. I mean, once it gets on Rebel News and they've got a massive following, and then it got, everybody got interested because it had the ingredients of a movie, of a conspiracy movie. It blew up, and I think, if they have learned any lessons, they'll let it drop. But then, I've seen now people tend to double down on their mistakes instead of admitting them. So, speaking of which,
I'll just say briefly on that. That's because the whole system understates Alex Jones's audience. The size, scale, and scope of his audience is deeply misunderstood by people who want to caricature him or misunderstand him or criticize him. And you can criticize him if you want. That's your privilege or prerogative. But don't, as part of that process, pretend there aren't millions of people who are deeply loyal to him and see him as one of the true last standing independent members of the press, the last standing free press in America. So that's because that was entirely due to the fact that she appeared on his show. That's why that happens. And it was his audience that rallied to him. So he may not keep her on as an independent contractor. That's a different story for a different day. But his audience has extraordinary capabilities to mobilize behind anyone that they think is getting wrongly attacked by the system.
Well, they certainly mobilize. I mean, a shocking amount. I guess it's shocking to someone who's not involved in that world, but it was a surprising amount of people that mobilized and really got the word out there and kept it alive throughout the weekend. Let's do this. Bannon. Now I know what I'm thinking, and I know where we're going to go with this. The overview for anybody, and Robert, you'll add the details if I've forgotten anything. Brian Kolfage, a triple amputee war veteran, war hero, started this GoFundMe page, a GoFundMe campaign. It was in 2018 called We Build the Wall, or We Will Build the Wall. It was a GoFundMe campaign, the goal of which was to raise $1 billion to give to the government to crowdsource the building of the wall.
Yeah, it was originally called We Fund the Wall.
We Fund the Wall. Sorry, so there's two names, and We Fund the Wall. We'll call it the GoFundMe versus the 501. From what I understood, it started as not a gag necessarily, but as a political statement. It took off like wildfire. Within, I think it was a week, they had over $23 million in donations. From what I understand, they realized that they're never going to get to $1 billion goal as stated on the GoFundMe campaign, which means that they would end up having millions of dollars either stuck in that account or refunded when it became clear they wouldn't achieve that goal. So they wanted to, they incorporated a new 501c4, which is a not-for-profit organization, and then they wanted to roll over the money that they raised into it. GoFundMe said, you can do that if you get everybody's express consent. And so everybody had to explicitly opt in to having their initial contribution in the initial campaign rolled over into the 501c4. 93% of the people did it, and they ended up with over $20 million that was now transferred into this not-for-profit organization. When they initially started the campaign on GoFundMe, Kolfage said, I'm not taking a penny, no salary, no compensation, no nothing. We're doing this all to build the wall. It's all 100% of it is going to go to the wall. When they were putting out the video to announce the transformation of the campaign, they needed everyone to opt in. Kolfage reiterated these initial comments, and the 93% of the people who opted in did so ostensibly on the basis of these warranties and representations, and on the, because they wanted to be part of the campaign nonetheless. Now there've been 4 of them have been indicted: Kolfage, Steve Bannon, who got involved involved in the day-to-day. And the indictment basically says that they defrauded the charity and the donors because 100% of the proceeds did not go to the wall. $1 million went to a separate not-profit that Bannon had set up, from which funds were diverted allegedly to Kolfage by way of remuneration, monthly salary, other expenses to Bannon, etc. That's pretty good on the facts.
Yeah. I mean, the additional context I'd put in is that when they launched the Fund the Wall, it was sort of political outrage at the time amongst the Trump base at the fact that Democrats and the Republican Congress was not authorizing funds to build the wall. And so that's sort of the backdrop. And it took off, and it was always originally intended as a political statement. So the original goal was just to let's show you how serious people are about seeing the wall built to the Republican base, to the Republicans in Congress, by showing you how much money they're willing to give directly to the government to see it happen. So it was always a political statement. They knew they weren't going to raise $1 billion. They knew that was impractical. But their point was to let's show you how significant this is. So it took off. The left and the media were outraged at this, and they attacked it en masse. And they the reason for the whole transfer was the media's first attack was, you can't do it. You can't give any money to the government. You're not allowed to. That's against the law. You're not allowed to give the government money to do something. The government apparently can only take it from you. Well, that's another political point for another day. So they realized that their premise was not going to hold up in terms of actually being able to deliver the money to the government. Their goal was just, again, publicity, political stunt, create action, force action, show how consequential this is. And so then the media put huge pressure on GoFundMe, saying, you know what, this is a bogus GoFundMe because they can't do what they're saying they're going to do. So GoFundMe was going to just refund all the money and block all future efforts to do Build the Wall campaigns on GoFundMe. They pushed back and said, look, our people are very committed. So we want to give them an opportunity to continue to make the political point, but we'll set it. But if you won't let us use GoFundMe, fine, we'll set up something else and use it that way. And originally GoFundMe thought they'd come up with a perfect way to kill it because this was just a big scam. Nobody really believed this nonsense. People have been suckered into giving the cash, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People giving the money knew exactly what they were doing. That this is one of the lies that's in the Bannon indictment by omission. What GoFundMe was shocked by was that 93% of the cash, 93% of the people opted in. They thought they would never opt in. Often people don't respond to those emails. Often they disappear. Often they vanish. They were completely shocked that occurred. And so then the second wave of criticism took place, which said, well, because they decided, hey, we'll shift it. We'll try to build it ourselves. We'll see how much of it we can build ourselves just to keep the issue in the public discussion, the public debate, show the Republican base how many people are so deeply committed to just this issue having happened that we'll do what we can. It was always to be a political statement. So everybody opts back in. They end up and then they get massive numbers of legal obstacles. People try to prevent them from being able to build the wall, use environmental permitting issues, every other kind of issue they can possibly do to preclude them from doing it. They still succeed at actually building parts of the wall on the border, which everyone said they couldn't do. In this time frame, you have Kolfage making statements that were your classic exaggerated statements of fundraisers. But what I'll do for people, that the most important part of the Bannon indictment is not what's in it, it's what's not in it. And there's three things to understand about what's not in it. One is the context for the wall that I just discussed, which is that everybody giving was doing it for a political statement and knew that. Second is that knowing the background of how the fundraising industry works, that the norm, and the third aspect is what's missing specifically from the indictment from a trial perspective. So on the first aspect, it's that background. Everybody knew they were giving it for political purposes to make a political statement. They were thrilled that things got done that everybody said they couldn't do, which was actually build part of a wall. So that's the political backdrop in general of the story. That it's mostly omitted from the discussion. The second part, and also in that capacity, the number of statements, they're very loose in the indictment with when statements were made, who heard those statements, and whether anybody actually gave money in response to those statements, which is the massive giveaway. It appears we have another victimless crime, just like the NRA case. The Southern District of New York, I guarantee you, if they had somebody, even one person anywhere in the country, who said they only gave the money because they thought not a penny would go to anything other than physical wall construction, they would have put them in the indictment. I've done plenty of these fraud cases. I've watched and studied many more. They always include 4 or 5 most sympathetic victims right up front in the indictment. Sometimes they keep them Jane Doe and John Doe, but often not, because they're usually going to be witnesses at trial. So you want that maximum level of empathy, maximum level of sympathy, completely missing from the indictment. So that's some backstory of what was going on with Build the Wall. The second part is background of fundraising campaigns. If this indictment is held up, you could indict 90% of charities in America. You could indict every single political campaign in America. You could indict the Trump campaign and everybody part of it. I'll give you an example. They send out all kinds of incentives for people to give. They say, if you give now, Donald Trump will personally match this 5 times, 6 times, 8 times, 10 times, different things. There's almost no way for them to track when you make the donation whether that was the response to it. And I can pretty much guarantee you he's likely not matching dollar for dollar each one of those people who gave in. According to the Southern District of New York, that's now wire fraud and 20 years in federal prison and forfeiture of your entire campaign fund. Almost all fundraisers do this. Now, I have told people in a wide range of contexts to be extremely careful about what you say if you're in a politically controversial arena anywhere in your business. They often don't follow my advice because it's just that it's the natural exaggeration of a salesman. Under this theory, if you make any statement that they can show is not technically true, even if it has nothing to do, in fact, with the transaction, that's the critical part here, then they can indict you for it. Well, I can indict every car salesman in Las Vegas tomorrow for that. They're going to say something to me that's an exaggeration.
That's the problem. And this is incidentally one of my problems with charities in the first place, and it's why I go to Charity Navigator to see how much the CEO of any given charity is paying themselves. I don't care if they disclose it. It makes it legally different, but if they disclose it and they're making $500,000 a year, like some are, who I won't name, that's offensive enough to me on its face. So the fact that there are worse charities out there, not to name a big one in particular, that have never been investigated, as far as I know, certainly not indicted, is one argument. That's going to go back to the unequal application of the law. Mm-hmm. My problem is that, and I see a lot of comments of people saying, well, I don't feel defrauded, I gave knowing, et cetera, et cetera. That's also a separate argument. The bottom line is, I imagine all they need is one or two or a handful of people who say, I didn't, want my money going to Kolfage's boat or whatever it was, and his, these things. So these are fraudulent misrepresentations to induce people to donate, even assuming and taking for granted the vast majority, if not, almost everybody knew what they were donating to and didn't care if Kolfage drew a salary, in which case, just make it transparent and say, okay, he will be drawing a salary. If you have a problem, whatever. And in Quebec, we have a term, it's called bon dol, which is like good trickery or good foolery. Like, yeah, the salesman exaggerates, it's the best car on the market. And I know that this, Kolfage got into it. He says, all of it's going to go to the wall, all of it with an asterisk, meaning, yeah, nobody's going to go out of pocket here. We're not going to invest our lives to do this. So it's, all of it goes to the wall. Obviously expenses are not going to go to it, but you don't say that. And then, does it become a crime in every other case? It probably not, because most other charities are going to say, well, we have an 80% return, or we give 60% and the rest of 40 goes to operations. And you could see our operations on our spreadsheet. The question is going to be then, was that done here? And why conceal what the expenses were? And why not disclose them right off the bat and be transparent to avoid this, knowing you're going to be the object of even more scrutiny than you've ever been in the past.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll get to some of those aspects. But the core is the backdrop of what would be normal. Because the other thing is, this really isn't like a charity. I know they set up a 501c4 ultimately to process things, but this is really a fundraising campaign, really like a political campaign. And so I see that as a distinction. So it's not like United Way, which has a specific set of outlines. And by the way, a giveaway, which I'll get into more detail in the third step, the fact there's not a single allegation of violating charity laws, of which there are many, is highly insightful about where I think this case, likely the evidence actually goes. It's one of the huge things that was glaring, that was missing from the indictment, that should be there if the case is what the government was saying it was. But going further, just the backdrop for people that know, the norm for fundraisers in political campaigns like this is they get at least 20% of everything that's raised. That's the norm. Like, for example, YouTube promotes super chats, right? Does YouTube disclose that they take 30%? Not really. You'd have to dig in to find that. Is YouTube defrauding all the super chatters? There's some people that might be agitated if they found that out.
People ask it all the time, and I had to look it up before I knew what it was. And yeah, I mean, true. I think there's just an example, but
it's good to know the broader context. So the broader context or background of what's normal here, and because it reminds me a lot of the bogus prosecution brought in Manhattan against the Abacus Bank. Good documentary about that, where they're trying to set up the Abacus Bank as a fall guy for Wall Street fraud. And I'll get into something else about Southern District of New York in a minute. But about who they charge and who they choose not to charge. But so understanding the backdrop that the norm The norm would be for a fundraising campaign is that the people involved in the marketing, just the fundraising side of it, would take 20% off the top. Then there's at least another 5% in payment processors. For example, by definition, his 100% promise couldn't be true because GoFundMe took a percentage of the funds. So that alone, under that definition, was he committing a crime by not disclosing that GoFundMe took 2.5%, 3%? That's why I ask people to play out the consequences of the theory they're pursuing here. They're trying to say if you make any kind of statement that could be possibly interpreted over here as untrue, then magically you've got a crime and we can forfeit all your money and put you in prison for 20 years. There's big problems with where they're going with this because of who it would drag in to the net of these. Fraud cases are, I deliberately lie in a material way that changes your conduct. And we'll get to, they actually don't have that here, is my view. We'll get to whether the aspects of that. So that's a broader context so people can know the norm. Normally, if there's a $25 million fundraising effort, the people involved in the fundraising get paid $5 million just for the fundraising. That doesn't include all the administration, which became a nightmare here because they were being attacked politically and legally all across the spectrum in ways they never anticipated. Kolfage's background is doing all these little fundraising campaigns for political active causes. That's what he does. He's a triple amputee, one of the few people to even physically survive what he went through in military combat. That's why a lot of people are sympathetic with him. I have no doubt that Bannon's extremely sympathetic to him. And he was also doing a lot of these activities. I'll give you one quick backdrop before I get into what's missing from the indictment as to what I think the real story is. If you know Steve Bannon, you know that his weakness is administrative organization. His strength is idea creation. He's an ENTP personality type if people want to look up Myers-Briggs. If I wanted to go after a guy like Bannon, I would find an administrative screw-up that he's made. Tax, accounting, finances, that's exactly where I would go. Because the guy hasn't met a barber in 20 years. He gets his fashion advice from people on Skid Row. I admire the guy in many respects, disagree with him on certain things. I've known a lot of personalities like this. Think sort of Jerry Lee Lewis, Nutty Professor. This is a guy that, you walk into his office and nothing's going to be even vaguely close to organized, but he'll insist, like Bill Murray in Ghostbusters, that there's different degrees of clean. So don't worry about laundering the clothes. That's who Steve Bannon is. So his weakness, and it was the big mistake they made here, aside from trying to hem in the people who love to overstate and exaggerate when they get excited because they're salesmen. But of course, stopping that is stopping human nature, in my view. But never say 100% ever. I've told people that in a whole bunch of different contexts. They'll say 100% refund rate, 100%. I was like, that guarantees you trouble because the ability to technically comply is going to be non-existent. And so I always tell people not to do that. But calling it fraud and criminal to the degree that we're going to put somebody in prison for 20 years is a whole different animal. But as to Bannon, it would not surprise me that Bannon has multiple projects. One, the idea that Bannon would do this to make money is nuts. Scott Adams pointed out that's highly unlikely to be true.
Well, so now I don't want to fight with Scott Adams on Twitter, and a lot of people are saying, he's worth 55 million or 20 million, whatever he's worth. He's worth a lot. He doesn't need the money. Why would he do it? So that's a superficial argument, just in the sense that a lot of times, people do things not because they need to, but because they can. It's a question of power. It's a question of hubris. It's a question of not caring, thinking you're above the law. So the worth, Bannon's worth is a non-issue for me. There's plenty of people who are rich that steal. Winona Ryder got caught shoplifting. That argument doesn't go very far with me. But
his second point on that, but it's relevant context, because if you're trying to unravel motivation and truth, and that was what likely happened here. In my view, you need to look at, okay, what's their motivation? What's their modus operandi? And the reason why I think Adams' point is good is it's two things. One, the fact that he has independent wealth means he didn't need to do it for the money. So then the question is there something in his character? The thing is, Bannon has been around tons of places where you could abscond money. He was heavily involved in Wall Street, heavily involved in Hollywood. They've put him under investigation now for years. They tried to go after him for voting issues several years ago because that's another administrative kind of weakness of him. It'd be like Steve Bannon to be registered in 3 places and not realize it. He had every opportunity to do so. When I start a case and someone's accused of tax fraud or other fraud, I look at their whole history, because if they're guilty, it will show up elsewhere almost without failure. They'll have employees that don't like them. They'll have other people that will have accused them of fraud. There'll be a history of problems. It is extremely rare that you are economically successful, have no problems, no allegations ever in 20 years where you had multiple opportunities to divert money and put your own pocket, and now suddenly you do it, that's the part I'm deeply skeptical of. Now, that plays into the third part. If you understand Steve Bannon has his hand in 20 different operations and activities at one time, he's that kind of guy. He's disorganized, does not have a tight-knit administrative operation, never has. It's always been a huge weakness of his in certain contexts. And once you know that, what I suspect happened is that money, at least as to his part, he's moving a lot of different money around, and I suspect he'll be able to show, and I'll get into why the indictment actually accidentally reveals this, that he was using separate sourced funds to pay Kolfage and other people. That he did not realize that any of those funds could be traced to build the wall funds. That he was not intending that at all. And the giveaway here is how vague. Now, let me go into the core part. If I knew nothing about this backstory, I would be telling you this case is bogus just by the indictment itself. And the reason for that is knowing what should be there. For people who read the indictment, who haven't done a bunch of criminal white-collar fraud cases in the States, people like Will Chamberlain and others, the indictment sounds persuasive. It's only if you know what's not there that you understand how problematic it is, where the evidence is likely leading to, that they're hiding. So to give an example, years ago, I took over a case in Atlanta. Construction businessman and his father had been railroaded by Sally Yates. For everybody remember Eternal Truth, Sally Yates is corrupt. And the degree of bad now what I did is, I'll take a look at a memorandum of interview, and I'll break down every single thing on that piece of paper. There's actually a bunch of great people on the internet who've been doing this in the Spygate context. People like Tracy Beans, people like Brian Cates, a wide range of people. Sometimes I disagree with where cases are going with them, but they do great breaking down data, information that's available and accessible out there in the public domain. So I'll break down the codes. I want to know everything. I want to know what that memorandum should look like if it's normally done, what information should be there, how it should be structured, how it should be presented, what codes should be put in the different code entries. Well, just by doing that simple step, I figured out in that case that they had completely doctored and fabricated a bunch of different reports. They had put different pages from different reports together and pretended that they were the same report to build an entirely falsified case against my client. All of his high-end white shoe lawyers, and this is where Steve Bannon may be in trouble. He's got old school Yale white shoe lawyers who will not know how to defend this case, in my view. They don't understand political cases and how to approach them. Probably why this case should have never gone to indictment, in my view, if properly defended pre-trial, but pre-indictment. But you go there. And so it's amazing what you can find. It's very hard to tell a lie well over time when you know what the truth should look like. And so that's just a good universal rule for anybody to apply in any case. I'll give another example. Alex Jones' civil defamation case. First thing I do in any defamation case, if I'm defending it or if I'm bringing it, I look at what's in quotes. Ignore all the things that are not in quotes, because that stuff that the person didn't say. They're trying to infer it, imply it, etc. What did they actually say? Because that's what defamation is what did you actually say? And you find in the Alex Jones lawsuits that almost none of the lawsuit has anything that Alex Jones actually said in quotes in it. It's all about their interpretation, extrapolation, suggestion, innuendo. The actual number of statements in quotes are very, very small. And then you realize that's what they're hiding. The problem is their case doesn't have core facts needed for defamation under constitutional standards, because what's in quotes doesn't constitute constitutionally cognizable defamation. So that's just another example. So I've done a bunch of fraud cases. Here's what you should have in a fraud case. And here's what they always do in a good fraud case. One, they highlight the victim up front. They have multiple victims. They include them in the indictment. Because they usually include exhibits that go with it, like emails, videos, testimony, excerpts, things of that nature. And they tightly tie in the statement to the donation or the money. In other words, and they give specific dates. They say on this date, this person said this to that person who heard that, and based on hearing that, gave money, and would not have given the money had that occurred. Had they been truthful. That's a tight, clean, neat fraud case. And you show every example where that occurred. You also, if there's amounts of money you're saying are diverted, you're specific. I guarantee you they've done a full accounting here. They have all the bank and financial records. So, and they're more clear. They're like, this money on this day transferred from this account to this one. The next day it transferred from here to here. The next day it was spent on this item. And so you have neat tracing, not tracing by innuendo, where you're like, this person has a boat. They also got money over here.
Well,
maybe they bought the boat with it.
Actually, and just an interesting interjection is, the cosmetic surgery, it's ambiguous in that Kolfage is a triple amputee. Cosmetic surgery might mean something very different for him than what we take it to mean on its face. I mean, but we are getting into the grounds of the defense. Like, I have no doubt Bannon's going to say, if you guys want that $1 million, it's still in this 501c4, my separate one. We've earmarked it or whatever. More money comes in there from other outlets. So the money coming in from We Build the Wall was not necessarily the money going out to Kolfage for whatever the reason.
But that's the point. In the indictment, they always rule that out in these cases. It is extremely rare that they bring an indictment that doesn't have that button down. And I guarantee you they have all the financial records. So that's where I was saying, like, what's missing from this indictment is any victim, which is unheard of. If you're going to bring a fraud case, have a victim. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're saying, well, he overpromised. And hypothetically speaking, that overpromise could have impacted someone's decision. That's not a fraud case. A fraud case is, on this day, you told George this. Based on you telling George this, he gave you money and he wouldn't have otherwise. And I'll get to why they already know they're screwed on that part, aside from the fact there's no victim in there. And we'll get into how this case has absolutely no business in the Southern District of New York. That's flagrant constitutional vote.
Before we get there, I'm going to screenshot here. Just in a nutshell, explain to people, I sort of understand why Southern District of New York is passed off as being totally corrupt. But if you can explain to someone who has no idea why it has the reputation it has in a nutshell.
Here's the best examples. The Southern District of New York brings more political high-profile cases than anybody, but magically, they're often people that are of low profile or political stature within their local community, or they're not even from there. So by contrast, where are the greatest financial criminals in the entire world located? They're located in the Southern District of New York, and it's called Wall Street. Magically, the Southern District of New York has never criminally prosecuted a major Wall Street bank in any recent memory. Magically, everybody involved in all the Big Short scandals documented in the book and the movie Big Short, nobody got prosecuted in the Southern District of New York or by the District of Manhattan or by the New York Attorney General. They all walked. So the reason why the Southern I'll recommend those for TV book recommendations. The great series Billions. I happen to know the whole backstory in part about that because years ago I was approached by some people who wanted to prevent a big Wall Street billionaire from buying a baseball team, Major League Baseball team. And they wanted me to do an analysis about whether this person was under criminal investigation because there were rumors that he was. So I was able to look and pierce together from available information on court dockets and other intel that, yes, he was clearly a high-profile target. I also told them that I didn't believe Preet Bharara would bring any charges because Preet Bharara is terrified of losing. And not surprisingly, he brought no such cases. But he was, and it later came out he was under criminal investigation, but that he would walk, and he did walk. The TV show Billions is all based on that story. Now, they've taken it in a wide range of different directions, but that's why it's about a famous federal New York prosecutor played by Paul Giamatti, who is loosely based on Preet Bharara, and the billionaire character is loosely based on the billionaire. I won't name him, but you can figure it out if you Google. And so that gives a backstory. So the Southern District how they portray things in Billions. I tell people that are in criminal defense cases that are clients of mine or potential clients, I tell them, watch the show and you will understand how the criminal justice process works. Watch Ray Donovan to figure out how the court of public opinion works in some of these kind of cases. Watch both and you really get an understanding. Ray Donovan spent several years based in New York. Starts out in LA, go to New York. Also accurately portrays what really goes on in New York. So the reason why New York is perceived as corrupt is because they bring cases that often smack of political motivation. They, like the Martha Stewart case, where she actually didn't do insider trading. They just set her up in a bad interview, and her white shoe law firm screwed up by letting her sit there and go through that interview and answer questions mistakenly. The Leona Helmsley case still has deep problems with it. So as a whole, They're known for bringing high-profile cases, but magically target people outside the political process. And while the big people in New York, particularly Wall Street, the institutional players, never get hit. It's not a coincidence. In recent years, it's been because of the very peculiar behavior of the Southern District of New York, contrasting the Clinton-related cases and Trump-related cases. In the Clinton-related cases, New York Attorney General never brought a single put it this way, there's a reason why when Clintons leave the White House, they don't go back to Arkansas. They don't go other place or Illinois, where she's from. They go right to Manhattan because they know they're never going to be prosecuted for anything in Manhattan. So not by the Manhattan DA, not by the Southern District of New York, not by the New York Attorney General, even though all of them have jurisdiction over the Clinton Foundation, which is the source of all the pay-for-play scandals. All of the activities involving Clinton emails have a strong nexus to New York. It's New York who stumbles on Anthony Weiner's laptop, which has Clinton emails that she'd been hiding from public view, that the D.C. Circuit just recently said she doesn't have to get deposed on. So that's the backstory of what the Southern District, and by contrast, the Southern District of New York has put almost anybody connected to Trump under criminal investigation. They let Michael Cohen walk off on real scandals just so he'll say bad things about Trump. They go after, here's another example. In the Mueller case, the Tony Podesta did worse, was actually the boss, effectively, of Paul Manafort, involving all the things that Manafort, they tried to get Flynn and that Turkish guy who ended up walking on, which was all the lobbying related to Turkey and other activities. Tony Podesta was neck deep in that. In fact, he was the top guy in it. Magically, he doesn't get prosecuted. Mueller, for CYA purposes, guess where he sends the case? Southern District of New York, knowing it will get buried there very effectively. So while Trump all his tax returns are being subpoenaed by the Manhattan DA, the New York Attorney General did a massive investigation into Trump's foundation, and they ended up shutting it down rather than deal with the harassment from New York. New York Attorney General is doing a very similar case against the NRA. Another's claim where, you're violating the rules by which these people gave donations to when all the donors are not complaining. So that's the history of the Southern District of New York. That's problem one. Problem two is they have had a bad history that they're accelerating of reaching outside of their jurisdiction. So venue, for people who don't know, is a constitutionally based doctrine. Now, unfortunately, our courts have mostly absconded from enforcing it because what courts in the Southern District of New York want to give up power over these high-profile political cases? So they won't say, to give you some illustration, I complained about this years ago. First time I complained about it actually was the World Cup case. So there was a bunch of corruption involving World Cup officials. That's been true for forever. Problem is, it had nothing to do with the Southern District of New York. Almost all the activities took place by foreigners in Switzerland or in their home countries. But the Southern District of New York somehow brings a prosecution. How? How are they the world's policemen? They believe that, by the way. They believe if they see something wrong anywhere in the world, because there could be some tangential, tiny connection to New York, they can bring a prosecution. The reason why we don't allow that for venue purposes is, one, we don't consider it fundamentally fair for you to be tried outside of your home community. It's vicinage in the old word, an old English language. And that's why venue is constitutionally protected, or it's supposed to be. It's in the Constitution. The courts just miss it, skip it. But the second component is we don't want politically motivated prosecutions. We don't want a small prosecutor. Let's say Roy Moore became the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama, or became the state prosecutor for the Attorney General. We don't want him saying, you know what, I think Barack Obama is illegally in the White House. I think he faked his birth certificate. I'm going to bring criminal charges against him here in Alabama in front of a Republican conservative jury. We don't want that to happen. We want people to only be prosecuted in their home community who have a political tie and connection to that community, both to defend their rights and because we're vindicating the community that's actually at interest. The Southern District of New York has no meaningful nexus to this case. Their only claim is there's a few people who live there who made donations, but they don't claim that any of those people say that they would not have made the donation but for these facts that they're alleging. So and that's just like the NRA. I don't believe Southern District of New York has any venue here. I think it's a violation of the constitutional venue provisions. I argued this obviously personally back in the Wesley Snipes case where they tried him in Ocala, Florida, when he had never been to Ocala. While they tried 8 of his people that were involved in that they called co-conspirators, they tried them all up in the District of Columbia. So they try the hillbillies in District of Columbia, and they try Wes in the per capita capital of racial hatred incidents. That's what kind of fraud the federal government can be when they want to abuse the venue provisions, and this is one of the most egregious. Another example, a couple of years ago, Southern District of New York brought a charge against gun runners. the fascinating thing was the gun runners were from Eastern Europe. They were giving guns to a Colombian rebel group. It had no connection to New York at all. The people weren't connected. No transaction was connected. No financial transaction. No gun trading. And really, it was frankly a political dispute. It was whether the East Europeans happened to agree with the Colombian rebels. Why in the world was that the Southern District of New York's business? But they love to grab power, and federal courts loves to enhance that power. So that's the reality of the Southern. So who is bringing the prosecution is a major problem to me right off the bat.
And you're talking Strauss or Berman?
In this case, I'm talking Strauss. Well, I'm talking the whole Southern District of New York. Okay. The Southern District of New York and the District of Manhattan. I got a current case against District of Manhattan, so I'll be more polite. But I'll put it this way. If you get into a fight over dog walking and bird watching anywhere in America other than the District of Manhattan, or if your politics were on a different side of the aisle, Amy Cooper's not prosecuted anywhere else. She's only prosecuting the District of Manhattan for politicized purposes. And I won't get into what some of the police officers that are aware of the case think, but let's just put it this way. They wouldn't have been the one to bring the case. So the case is being brought for politicized purposes because that's what they do in New York. I really encourage people to watch the documentary on the Abacus Bank. A great little Chinese American set up a wonderful little bank for the Chinese community in New York City. And it's just like this case because they have people making inaccurate statements in the loan applications, but it caused no harm. The Fed, nobody was complaining. What happened was people had illegal source income and couldn't say that. So they had to say their income was over here rather than over there. And so they couldn't, but they all paid back their loans. They had a lower failure rate than every other Wall Street bank, and yet they get criminally prosecuted for the Wall Street bank fraud. It was ridiculous. But now luckily they were able to win that case with some excellent New York old school defense lawyers. But that's who they are in New York. Everything is political. They're politically motivated. They're politically tarnished in the way they bring their cases, and they're the worst. They're, in my view, the most corrupt federal prosecutors unit in America. And for people who are wondering whether maybe I personally am aware of multiple cases the Southern District of New York is handling. I won't go into detail of those cases because they're pre-indictment, where they have nobody complaining and they're targeting people for political purposes, and purely political. That they said, I don't like that person. What can we go after them for? And this is the old Beria rule, where Beria told Stalin, you don't worry about the crime. Show me the man and I'll find you the crime. And that's my other point, broader about the context of the industry. If I put anybody in America under microscopic review, I can find something in your life I call criminal, because we do find the laws are all over the place. And if you're in any kind of financially complicated enterprise, guaranteed. And if you're dumb enough to try, I've told people not to open 501c4s, 501c3s. Out of the gate, by the way, these things are not even being approved by the IRS for a year plus. So you're wasting your time with it. The only reason you would do it is it makes it a tax deductible deduction, but nobody really in the people spending build the wall didn't care about that.
Quick question. What's the difference between a 501c3 and a 501c4? Cernovich asked Kolfage the question in the interview, and I didn't know the answer.
It's different activities and different regulations, but huge traps in all of them. Huge trap. That's why I found fascinating. I was like, okay, if there was truly malfeasance here, you always include 501c violations. It is so easy. I mean, the number of people don't even understand how strict those things are. You can't have anything they call self-dealing in those transactions, anywhere close to it. Not a single self-dealing allegation. That means that the money trail doesn't lead where they say it does, and that's why it's vague. My guess is that they have inferences. This money went here, and this money over here was spent there. We're going to connect the two, even though we didn't properly trace it. And because there's some huge flaws sitting in this case evidentiary because of what's not being alleged in the indictment. Now, here's my biggest problem with the case is who is bringing it. They have no business bringing it, and all the evidence in the world is that it's politically motivated.
Save and except for the allegation in the indictment specifically there to the effect that some of the donors were from the Southern District of New York. Or wherever.
Yeah, but by that standard, everybody everywhere can bring prosecutions now. If you have any financial tie in any way, shape, or form, any contributor tie, donor tie, that means any prosecutor's office anywhere in the world, in America, can bring a charge because there's going to be some financial personal connection to any global enterprise. That's what they're asserting. The problem is they're not from there. Their operation wasn't based there. They didn't do the banking there. They didn't do most of the finance. They didn't do any of the organizational bases there. The wall ain't being built in New York, not yet at least. Maybe time. It should be the Escape from LA style. But the this does not fit the definition of proper venue. They also likely do not have a proper factual predicate. This I'll guarantee you this did not come about because somebody complained to them. This came about because they decided to voluntarily do it on their own accord. Now, the second problem I have with it, why are they bringing this charge right on the eve of the Republican National Convention, right as Bannon is getting back in the game of advising Trump?
Yeah.
Isn't that an amazing coincidence? Now let me give you my big overarching claim. I mean, if I was the lawyer on this case, I'd be torching everybody. But by the way, one of these prosecutors is the Ghislaine Maxwell prosecution. So anybody having any hope that the Ghislaine Maxwell prosecution goes anywhere other than accuse Republicans can kiss it goodbye. Because if she's involved with this case, that means that case is going to be politically corrupted and contaminated as well. No surprise. Maybe she's really in there for the same reason Epstein was locked up, which is the second eternal truth, everybody. Epstein did not kill himself. So I have huge problems with the case. I know that it's different than a lot of other people's opinions out there, but it's based on who is bringing it, when they're bringing it, and the fact that I've done tons of these cases, and this is the weakest mail fraud case. I mean, I've defended people accused of Ponzi schemes. Few of them, maybe, the jury said a few of them were guilty. And some of them were, got screwed up in the rest. But I know what a strong case looks like. I know what a weak case looks like. This is the weakest case I've ever seen. And who is bringing it and when they bringing it make me believe it's politically contaminated. One last fact. Here's the other giveaway on this case. In January, what I found fascinating was they took key exculpatory facts and twisted them into incriminatory facts, which is always the sign of a corrupt prosecution, in my view. So sometime in late fall, Bannon finds out that according to the indictment, Bannon finds out that they're looking at this build a wall operation. So what you would do if let's say you're innocent and you're in his position, you're like, oh, okay, hold on, they're saying something's criminal. Well, what is it? Oh, okay, that they think how the funding is worth. Okay, and remember, by the way, a key fact of the indictment, they never identify a single time where Bannon said that that every single penny, nickel, diamond, dollar would go to the wall. They never had Bannon saying that. In fact, there's a Vice interview out there where Bannon says he's kind of a volunteer for it. Well, he says kind of, by the way. He doesn't say full volunteer. But so on that point, it was striking that they only have Kolfage making statements. And then they don't neatly tie in those statements to a specific person, which is what a fraud case is supposed to be. So another key component to all of this is that in the indictment, in terms of the Bannon aspect of all of this,
I'm an idiot. I keep swiping myself out of the damn.
That's all right, no problem. So is that the fact they don't tie Bannon in is going to be a critical fact, I think, in time. I think it means it's not clear. But what does Bannon do when he let's say you're innocent and you find out, maybe there's a screw up here. Money went to him. I guess he wasn't supposed to get any money or whatever, if you're Steve Bannon, for example, because they don't tie Bannon into these internal communications about a lot of stuff, notably. Their only tie to Bannon is that Bannon says, hey, any deal I want to know about. But then they don't say he knew about any of the rest. It was an amazing extrapolation. But so back in January, they tell the whole world, by the way, Kolfage is getting paid and there's salaries and compensation coming here. That's 8 months ago. And so they try to make that into a bad act. My view is that's key exculpatory evidence because you know what I'm going to guess is likely the case because it's, again, missing from the indictment. Nobody complained. Nobody asked for a refund. If the reason they gave was because they thought that magically every single penny of a fundraising campaign would never be spent on anything related to fundraising or administration, but would just go to physically building the wall. Assuming that premise, which misunderstands who was giving money in this context, but putting that aside, why didn't any of them request refunds? They've known for 8 months that Kolfage was getting paid. So, and yet they turk that and they make that a bad act. Well, the other thing they make is a bad act. Yeah. By the way, for everybody out there, good practical advice, other than always in cash, never in writing. Just good advice. Earl Long's old lesson. Just good advice generally to not deal with the government tracking or tracing you in every respect. But my guess is they started to use Signal. What I find shocking is that it shows you how clueless Bannon is, that he wasn't using this for much longer. Signal, for those people out there, is the most secure app in the world by far. I was introduced to it by I can't disclose who, but one of the highest ranking government officials whose responsibility is national security and security of communications. And he told me about a case related to the Mueller inquiry that he said, I won't talk to you except, he needed to talk to me, but he's like, I'm not going to talk to you except with Signal. And he was extremely careful about how, I mean, he used an intermediary, but so I never, there was no track record of me ever talking to him other than on Signal. And that's when I realized, wow, Signal must be legit. And I'd seen from Snowden and other people that it was good. The reason is this: it's an open source app. It's not corporate controlled, but that's part one. Part two is there's no centralized location. What most people don't know is when you text, there's a centralized location that keeps all of those texts. Now, also, they get bounced up to the NSA, and the NSA has them all. But the feds don't have normal access to the NSA's database, the Echelon system. But they can go to the phone company and get it directly because your texts are stored there, even if you delete it on your own phone and the person receiving it deletes it. So I've told people, if you want secure communications, you must use Signal because Signal has no centralized storage location. They have to physically get your phone in order to get it. So my view is, based on what's there, I believe that based on what's missing from the indictment is that these folks did not set out to defraud anybody. They made, Kolfage made an overstated promise that he should have corrected quicker once it became so complicated, it was going to take up all his time. Bannon took corrective action. I would have been more aggressive. I would have made sure everybody knew the whole story back in January. Once they realized this was an issue, he would have got tons of people on his side. The sympathy for Kolfage is very high because of what he's been through.
And that's why, I understand the changing of the website is a double-edged sword because some are going to say, yeah, it's an overt act to let people know. Others are going to say, you're changing the small print once the boat is in motion and it's not as clear-cut as you think it is.
You're always better off changing it because, by the way,
I would have made a massive statement about it, not just, not casually change it.
I'd have done that first. I would have offered refunds to anybody upset. Respond, see what happens within 60 days. And then I would have sued the Southern District of New York right after that. I would have gone after him. I would say it's politically motivated. They're going after Trump targets. This is selective prosecution. Here, by the way, is the net effect of this. Steve Bannon is taken out of commission for advising Trump. Trump will keep his distance because of the nature of the case. A lot of Bannon's advice was starting to get better. It had been weak, frankly, bad for a while, but it was starting to get good about core cultural populism. He understands very well. Trump was starting to emulate, imitate, and repeat these trends. They take Bannon out of the picture. Secondly, they send a message, which they've been sending since 2016. If you want to help Trump and you are successful at any level, you are going to be put under microscopic investigation at some point. And unless you have a perfect past, you will be prosecuted. Merry Christmas. And number three, in terms of the timing of when it took place, in terms of what happened, they're also trying to do something broader. They're trying to shut down the wall campaign because, by the way, their ridiculous forfeiture request and how excessive it is.
Yeah. Okay. So. Actually, Real Bambuga from a while back, I have a screenshot of the chat, but brought up the forfeiture. Regardless of what I think of the law, the indictment itself, because I have my I won't call it a prejudgment at this point. I have my assessment based on one side of the story. I know what the defense is going to be. I know where the gray water is going to be, and I know that I think other entities should have been. If this is the new standard, and if I think it's deserved in this circumstance, it's got to be 10 times more deserved in another circumstance.
Yes, correct.
Setting all that aside. The forfeiture seems to me like I tweeted it out today. It's like we're gonna indict you. We're gonna make allegations that everything you own is the proceeds of the crime you are alleged to have committed. We're gonna seize everything you have and now go defend yourself. Innocent until proven guilty, but you've got nothing to do it with.
Oh, exactly. I mean, forfeiture law has always been problematic. It's ironic that they're again using it when the left is complaining about forfeiture laws. Forfeiture laws have been a problem for many years. 20 years ago, I was at actually a little more than 20 years ago, special conference at Howard University, where a young African-American brought up the problem of civil forfeitures in rural Kentucky. I investigated it and was shocked by it. I've tried to bring laws in different contexts about it. I brought peonage challenges where they're trying to basically imprison people for debt in some of these contexts. I've challenged forfeitures whenever I can. They need to be challenged continuously and more broadly. What people don't realize, the government can come and steal your stuff without ever actually convicting you of a crime. That's the problem.
And people should appreciate even an acquittal doesn't necessarily get your forfeiture back.
That's exactly right. That's number one. Number two, they have a habit of seizing more than they can trace. So what they're going to do here, this is why also they're being vague in the indictment. Like you notice they said Steve Bannon used it for personal expenses. Well, how much? I guarantee you there's an internal accounting. That number must be so low or for some reason look bad or because they want to grab more than they can or should for forfeiture purposes. Because here's what's going to happen. They're going to seize all the build-the-wall forfeiture funds. They already have. So do you think they're going to build the wall with it? Don't think so. Southern District of New York. Secondly, they're going to use this as an excuse to find out all the donors to build the wall. And they're going to find there's some big donors, by the way, some legally and financially sophisticated ones. And they're going to target them. So you just like the New York Attorney General is using her NRA suit to get the name of every single NRA donor in the country, the Southern District of New York is using this case to freeze and end forever build the wall. Secondly, to get all the donations, to find out who donated to build the wall, all their names, all their identification. I do not trust them to not go further. I know they are doing this in other cases. They're trying to get customer lists, trying to get donor lists, trying to get contributor lists for the purposes of targeting them. This goes way back, by the way. In the 1940s, they used to use whoever signed a petition for certain candidates, they would put them on blacklist to call them communists or anything else. So there's a long history of them. The state of Alabama, before the Southern District of New York used this tactic, state of Alabama was doing it in the 1950s and 60s, trying to figure out who was donating to the NAACP to put them on a list. The U.S. Supreme Court said that actually was protected information. Hasn't stopped them from abusing their power in the criminal context. So the criminal context is just unchecked power, unfortunately. And when it's as politicized as the Southern District of New York, the District of Manhattan, and the state of New York, then you can be put under the gun. So that they're doing that. And the third, I believe, political goal with this is to terrify conservatives from making contributions to conservative right-wing causes. So they've already been waging war on Patreon to not support certain conservatives, selective censorship, overnight removal. They're doing the same thing, of course, on Medium and other. They've done it frequently on GoFundMe. There's certain conservative causes that have not been allowed to raise funds. GoFundMe has forfeited funds in certain contexts, refused to allow the funds to be spent for the cause that people contributed to. So their goal is, what's the net effect of this? Oh, I better not give to that next big concern because it's maybe it's a fraud, maybe it's a scam. Because it's one thing they did here. They did a good job of using the headline of $25 million as if that's the amount of fraud alleged. The amount of fraud alleged is less than $1 million. Because here's one of the big giveaways for this, folks. Build the Wall spent more money on actually build the wall than almost any charity or campaign in the country spends on their intended project.
So, and Robert, just to push back on that one point, some people are going to say they did it as cheaply as possible to net as much profit as they can, or I don't know this part, using contractors with whom they have ties to, whatever. They'll go through the standard sort of rebuttal to that. I don't know what
people can do all that, but here's just by what's not alleged in the indictment. The indictment only alleges $1 million misallocated.
Yeah.
And so that means 24 million was not. And so that means you're talking about a 95%. I can tell people for political campaigns, they spend less than half the money they raise. Judicial Watch. Every year they spend 20 to 25% of their money just on fundraising efforts. So the fact that you gave money to build the wall and it actually went to building the wall at 90 to 95% would be one of the highest rates of actually going to your intended cause of any fundraising effort in the country in the past 5 years.
That there's no question about it. First of all, I mean, you actually sort of just did blow my mind, not improving the innocence of the defendants based on the indictment, but rather just the politicized nature of this. All of those things. I mean, you're right. With the NRA getting the list of donors, you can anticipate that being a concern in this. Freezing up whatever's left of the funds. I assume if they spent enough of it on the wall, there's hopefully not much left that the government's going to seize and waste on its own. Another thing people don't know, when you post money in court, for example, just in a civil suit, the court takes, I don't know, anywhere between like an 8 to 12% administration fee of that amount. So you want to screw somebody or be a jerk, make them deposit the money in court. You're going to waste 10% of it on a year, regardless. So the idea that the government's going to do anything less than waste this on its own, even after having seized it, is enraging enough.
Correct. And that would be part of my defense if I was in the court of public opinion or as at trial. I guarantee you they spent more money on building on what they're supposed to do than the government ever will with this money. Not only in terms of the government has no interest in building the wall, the Southern District of New York doesn't, but the Southern District of New York's administrative fees on the monies it forfeits, on the receiverships it gets assigned to, on its bankruptcy proceedings, nowhere near 1995 does it stay less than 10%. So that's why it's like Abacus case, because the Abacus case, I was like, hold on a second. The fraud we're worried about is people getting loans who couldn't pay it back. And it turns out these guys paid back loans at a higher rate. So you're arguing about, well, there's some inaccurate statements made and there's inaccurate affidavits. I was like, but it's not really material. It doesn't. That's not why we have these criminal laws. And it struck me the exact same way. The arguments I would make is, let's say they were sincerely concerned. They really thought people gave money because they didn't understand. And somehow didn't realize when they were not getting complaints or going out and talking to people, not getting them to go along, that meant their theory was wrong. But let's put all that aside. Let's say they really thought this was a serious problem. There's a proper way to do it. You would refer to the IRS for civil investigation of whether or not there's been an appropriate handling of the monies within the 501c4. And secondly, you would refer it to the actual venue that has jurisdiction over the case. So in the Steve Bannon's case, it'd be Florida, and I don't know where Kolfage lives. I think it's Texas. You transfer it there. The fact that they didn't tells you that they don't actually have confidence that an independent prosecutor would agree of the criminal worthiness of their case. Because otherwise they would happily do so, because that's the proper protocol. I guarantee you the Southern District of New York would go nuts if Texas or Florida decided to usurp New York cases from New York, of New York defendants. So it's a deeply problematic case. I mean, you've done a good video that shows a part of the other side. Will Chamberlain, if people want to see it, he presents the other side from my side of the equation. I'm just saying that from my personal experience, this is a case that would not be brought other than political motivation. And I think at a minimum, it's exaggerated charges and a misuse of prosecutorial resources. And I think down deep, let's say I'm right, that it just turns out it's administrative financial screw-ups, that Bannon just didn't make clear that this was separated from this and this was separated from this. If I'm right, then they really don't have a case. The way Bannon's acting, he's acting like he believes he has some aces in the hole. Now, flip side, Bannon's naive. Mueller rolled him with ease. And he has a white shoe lawyer, and I just don't trust any white shoe lawyer criminal defense case. I don't know this particular one, so I'm not saying anything negative about him personally. I'm just saying I don't trust white shoe law firms to know how to defend political cases. You get Roger Stone and General Flynn's original case outcome when you hire white shoe firms more often than not. They don't know how to wage war. They're usually scared to do so. They're usually friends and allies with the prosecutors on the other side, so they don't want to upset their little cocktail party in the Hamptons next summer. I don't have that fear. So I would be throwing grenades every which way. Bannon's personality would be to do that. But I'm not seeing it yet. And I think that's unfortunate. But I am more worried about the broader consequences of this case, not only over criminalizing behavior that can be remedied in other ways, but also in what it means for forfeitures and what it means in the conservatives, people on the right's ability to fundraise, things of this nature. I think it will have a very detrimental impact. That, again, it's the left weaponizing the legal process and the prosecutorial process to gain a political edge, and they will gain it from this case. Okay,
you've. I didn't need the convincing of the prosecutorial abuse potentially, or the politicizing of the charges, but I think you're going to have opened a lot of people's eyes to it. And on that question, Jay Mill says, "Why is the government allowed to do anything more than forcing them to return all donations?"
Watch Billions, by the way. There's in this past season, they actually had an episode where they figured out a way to take money and fund a special pet project for a politicized purpose. And it's because there's a bunch of loopholes. So years ago, I was tangentially involved in a case. I had no idea that I was watching a documentary on a show called Concrete, but spelled with a K. And this guy was breaking down a bunch of Ponzi schemes. And I briefly represented one of the people that was accused, and I had no idea of the cases he was connected to. But what it turned out is one of the big cases was that the receiver, being assigned to the court to manage Ponzi funds, was managing to scam all the money for himself for almost a decade. That shows you how loose the system is. If you want to scam people, go to bankruptcy court. I always say every criminal goes to bankruptcy court, because the other people involved are all just looking at lining their own pockets, not protecting the original creditor, the original donor, whomever that is. So there should be strict rules in place. But again, this is the government. So why does a court want to restrict the prosecutor's ability to help enrich the government? They just don't, unfortunately.
Okay, now we got here. Can one state sue another if Southern District is stealing the case from another state? Can they sue to stop that from happening?
No, not effectively not. All that could happen is they could try to grab the case by bringing their own charges. But that's it. Otherwise, and that's the problem. If you're abusing venue, the people who decide whether the venue is being abused are the people abusing the venue. So that's why venue is very powerful in the Constitution, very weak in administration. It reminds me of the old. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say actually, someone had asked the question: how does forfeiture not violate the Fourth Amendment?
Oh, it should. It's because the Supreme Court has issued a bunch of bogus decisions. It started with drug cases. They wanted to get around the rules. How does it not violate the Fifth and Sixth Amendment? Right, because it impacts your ability to get your defense. Now they have slightly moderated those cases and decisions, so they recently allowed for more release of funds. But the best way to screw a defendant, you forfeit all of their money up front, seize all their assets. They can't even defend themselves anymore because they no longer have the means of counsel. That's why they do this all the time, and the courts let them get away with it. Scalia had one of the dumbest decisions ever in the Fourth Amendment context, Fifth and Sixth Amendment context, Eighth Amendment context too, because it impacts bail. And unfortunately, they've issued bad decisions. Why? Because they want drug defendants and mob defendants to be screwed. So they just changed the Constitution to allow that political outcome to occur. But no, under a meaningful application of the Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, Eighth Amendment, in this case, I would argue there's a First Amendment implication. They should not be allowed to do this. For example, in a civil case, here's what's incredible. In a criminal case, it's easier to deny someone their physical freedom with a lower evidentiary standard and a less right to a hearing, and to seize all of their money and assets in a criminal case than it is to even restrain assets in a civil case. How does that make sense? How is it in a civil case I have a higher burden if I'm the plaintiff to freeze assets than I do if I'm in a criminal case? It should be the opposite, because the standard should be beyond a reasonable doubt. But it's because they let them get away with it because of how powerful a tool it is. So it's the weakness in the system is it always depends on the system to police itself. And it doesn't do a very good job of it in contexts like these.
Okay, I got to read one from Roses. I can't bring up the chat anymore, and every time I try, I swipe myself out of the stream, so I'm done trying to go back. Roses for the super chat said, have you seen the work of Mark Skidmore and Catherine Austin Fitts exposing missing $21 trillion on federal account FASAB, FASAB, Statement 56, which essentially allows omission, falsification of federal spending reporting, missingmoney.solari.com, SOLARI.
Personally, I don't. I mean, I know there's been a lot of documentation of defense money that just disappeared. Money during war vanishes all the time. So and of course, the Black Ops budget is always just one deep black hole. So there's a lot of examples of the government doing this. No doubt about it.
All right, and we got from Ginny Barnes question: Laura Loomer has a case with the equal time rule.
Yeah, so I'd have to look into it in further detail. What the issue is the Federal Election Commission requires broadcast stations to afford equal time for campaign advertising and other things and so that's why you have to give the best rates to political campaigns. So political campaigns get the cheapest and most affordable rates. And I think and so the argument is, does that apply to Twitter? Right now, it doesn't. It probably won't, is the short answer. I wish it would, but I don't think that likely they will say, the FEC will likely not say it does.
All right, now we're going to hear some noise, but we'll ignore it if you hear it. I just want to read those. If the Clinton Foundation spent 24 of every $25 million donated to Haiti on Haiti, Haiti would be a first world country by now.
Obviously, the most egregious example is the Clinton Foundation. Never investigated or prosecuted by any of the authorities in New York. But somehow the Build the Wall gives money to a triple amputee because he made exaggerated, dumb statements trying to hype it. And all of them, he and Steve Bannon are supposed to go to prison for 20 years.
My only problem with it is I suspect some of the stuff in fact occurred. It is my problem with charities, fundraisers. I know how people take the money out of it. It drives me nuts. Even when they're upfront about it, it drives me even more nuts because I just think it's offensive half the time. But the question is, if this is not the worst of it, it might, if even assuming it's all true, it's by no means the worst of it. So how did they decide to go full throttle against Build the Wall, triple amputee, Bannon, who carries the political baggage he does, on the, at the timing it happened,
especially without a donor complaining and without this case really being connected to their jurisdiction. So,
all right, we got American Sun. Here's $142.86, so you can get $100 I wanted to give you after Google takes their 30%. Can you and Robert talk a little about the murder of the 5-year-old Cannon Hinnant in North Carolina? What's to talk about? It's, first of all, thank you very much for the super chat. It's just awful. I mean, it's just awful.
Yeah, and I think what most people are frustrated by is that it's a case that if the races were reversed would have been 24/7 coverage for weeks on mainstream media coverage. And to give people an example, like I often talk to friends of mine who are on the BLM side of the equation, and I tell them, look, if there was actual evidence that I could prove racial targeting by police, I would be the first one to bring a lawsuit anywhere, wherever that's occurring. I can tell you that the reason why I can't is because the evidence actually refutes it. And I say, I'll give you an example. I say the reason why you don't know otherwise is because if the victim is white of a police abuse case, they get 10 times less coverage than if the victim is African American. And so the reason why people think there is a disproportionate targeting of African Americans is because the media says that by how they choose to cover it. So the Cannon case is really, I mean, it's a horrific trauma and tragedy that occurred. And the deserved coverage on its own basis to say, how do we get here that something like that could happen? And what might we do that could prevent it in the future? But I think the people's bigger political narrative is that it's extraordinary that when the races are reversed, suddenly the coverage vanishes from the press. And the press is more overt now than ever. All the network press will do everything they can to defeat Trump. The headlines are all on that side of the aisle. And that's why it was covered the way that it was. It was a terrifying tragedy to see happen. And it's also, by the way, a side effect of tuning up racial hatred like the media has done over the past several weeks. They could have done things that were racially reconciliatory, but instead it's just been the opposite. And I had some conversations with some people that were going to be talking to Oprah's people, and I was pointing out that they had several good case examples where she could try to start to unify the country. Instead, I think you saw recently she doubled down the other way. So it's very unfortunate that the racial conflict that they think is their tool to power, so they're going to promote it like mad. And if it leads to 5-year-old kids getting shot or has some part of it or some role in it, they don't care and they cover it up. And so it's sad and unfortunate. But it shows how critical this election probably is for people, that this election will have much bigger consequence than your typical election.
No, couldn't agree more. Sakake Onse says Laura Loomer is apparently being barred by Comcast in regards to her texts and emails being broadcast across their internet system. Would this be a further issue on top of Twitter and others?
Yes, it would. It's always been an open question to what degree can cable companies using the purpose of the equal time rule was to make sure utilities could not use their broadcasting monopolies to effectively favor one candidate over another. Now, that hasn't stopped them from actually doing that. Watch the nightly news, and it's clear you'd have no doubts who ABC, CBS, and NBC are favoring. But at least there's some rules in place to protect how advertising is done. The problem is so much of has shifted to both cable and to the internet that where the FEC rules are not being consistently enforced, that a serious problem has occurred that's disproportionately. But again, it's favoring the people who are weaponizing it in the first place, and they're the ones who control most of the legal and governmental administrative process.
All right, and I'm bringing up one political pothead says more to the story. The murder suspect was friendly with the boy's family.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Some things I have a harder time reading bad things. This is one I just can't. You can't read it.
The nature of the murder is there's something severely wrong with the individual who committed the murder. So at a minimum, it's either sick psychopathic behavior or it's someone that's severely mentally ill. But there's one of the two, because you don't kill a 5-year-old boy. That's not an accident. That's not we got into a fight.
No, it's terrible.
Absolutely.
Nothing more. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. Michigan won't take us too long, I think. Do we want to talk about the Michigan ruling?
So yeah, well, let's see. There's Michigan will be brief. There's Michigan, Kleinsmith, and the Outcry show. So in terms of Michigan, it's the state courts. Now there you had a Republican judge and I think a Democratic judge, and then I think there were 2 Republican judges I think split, and then the Democratic judge joined the majority for a 2-1 decision. It was technically like the Wisconsin case, so it wasn't as much a constitutional question as a statutory authority question. But here's the big problem. For years, people told me Alex Jones is a crazy conspiracy theorist because he thinks the government someday can use emergency powers to, like X-Files, put us all in camps and lock us up. And they all told me, I was like, hey, take your shots at Jones. He's been wrong upon occasion, but he's been freakishly ahead of the curve sometimes. It's like, even when I think he's wrong, he'll turn out he'll be more right than I thought he was. He understated it, because here's the problem. Governors are given emergency powers for limited time periods, because that's what the emergency is supposed to be about, a limited time period. Now, in Michigan, they have a law. They had one law that governed epidemics, emergencies, and another one that governed general emergencies. And somehow the court said, yes, it's true that this statute actually references epidemics, but we're going to ignore that and focus solely on the other emergency statute instead. And secondly, that those time limits don't actually mean anything. So it turns out we don't even need a legislative branch in Michigan. The executive branch can just be the legislative branch because, hey, all they got to do is say emergency, and magically the Constitution and all the laws disappear.
Not just that, but I finally got a copy of the majority decision. I'm not going to do a separate video on it because it's too tedious and it's too also specific. But they say Whitmer declares it, and she hasn't declared it over yet. And so until such time as she declares it over, they can operate by executive authority and bypass the legislature entirely. It's outlandish on its face. The only question is how you get two. I say that. I just don't understand how you get two judges to rationalize. You have two different laws, one from 45, one from 76. The one from 76 specifically references epidemics and says that even under these circumstances, I think 30 days, or I forget how long it was. And then two judges say, now we're going to rely on the initial law that doesn't reference epidemics and that doesn't create a timeline. So they can rule by executive authority so long as they declare the emergency exists and have not declared it doesn't exist. When do people determine on their own that it's been long enough? I mean, like it invites upheaval, the decision.
Absolutely. These are royal edicts. The reason why we have a tripartite branch of government, we borrowed executive branch from the old royal rule, and we wanted to check them by not letting them pass laws or make rules and not letting them adjudicate those rules. And now they're just saying, scratch it. All you got to do is say emergency, and all those laws go right out that door. A whole branch of government goes bye-bye. It's a joke. And so it makes a joke. Now, when I said, when we were talking about this all the way back when all this started, I said, don't expect for people. I said, here's the hurdle for courts that I was trying to avoid by the way I brought lawsuits, was there's a long history of the judicial branch abandoning its duties and obligations anytime there's a perceived quote-unquote crisis. And that's exactly what's happened. That they have found, when you have to say things like, yes, this law here is specific to epidemics and this law is not, but we're just going to assume otherwise. It's like, like the way they even phrased it, I was like, that's embarrassing. That's just,
No, they phrase it that the state of emergency exists so long as they declare it and has not yet been declared over. Therefore, all the executive orders are valid, and you don't have to go to the legislature for normal passing of laws. And
correct.
What was the term? It was the term about two laws dealing with the same subject. It was a Latin term. I forget what it was. But the bottom line, say it again.
I was going to say the specific one always taught. The rules, they call them canons of statutory construction. If there's a law that deals with a specific topic, it always trumps the law that does not deal with that specific topic, that is just general. And they actually completely reverse that in this case. And so it's extraordinary. The other thing they said, by the way, is not only can the emergency rule provisions last as long as she says, they said she can just redeclare it anytime she wants, and that there's nothing they can do to prevent it, and that the scope of her power is not limited by a nexus to the emergency authority. Because that was the other objection the legislature was making. They're like, she's legislating on tons of things that have nothing to do with the virus. And they're like, doesn't matter, just whatever she declares. So it's the judicial branch absconding from its constitutional obligations to enforce the Constitution and the laws in times of crisis, which unfortunately is very commonplace.
All right, we got J. Robitaille says, a wise man once said there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. Income tax was apparently a temporary measure to recoup war expenses.
The withholding portion was, yes. The withholding portion was called a victory war tax in the World War II, and then they just decided to expand it. The income tax form itself was instituted predominantly during World War II, and they saw what great success they had. They called it a victory tax, though. They had better policy.
You got titles. The euphemism titles that they always, whatever the title is, it's the opposite of it.
Exactly. But speaking of scams, There's probably no bigger. There's some good writers out there that have alternative opinions on this, but my view is the Kleinsmith indictment reveals that the Durham investigation is meaningfully over in terms of prosecutions. I think he will issue a scathing report. Probably will issue that report sometime in the fall to satiate Trump, but that they're not going to bring any other criminal prosecutions against any high-ranking participants based on what the Kleinsmith plea revealed.
Okay, so sorry, I might have been on mute. For everybody who knows, Kleinsmith is call him a low-level lawyer, but he's a lawyer in the file who has now been the only individual prosecuted charged with making a false statement. What was it? I don't want to say falsifying
Submitting a false document.
He added a word to an email. Do you know who the email was between and to?
We do not yet. We just know it supposedly was to the supervisory special agent.
Okay, so Kleinsmith, who's an attorney, what was it? I mean, we discussed it last week.
He was the deputy general counsel for the National Security Division of the Department of Justice. So he was the lowest guy on that. He's high in power vis-a-vis the rest of the world, but he was the lowest guy on the totem pole within that group.
All right, and his modifying or call it falsifying a document was to add to an email to which he was not a party before sending it off the words that Carter Page was not a source for the reasons we discussed last week. Only person against whom charges have been pressed pleaded guilty to the one count. He was in front of a judge. I don't have the judge's name, but from what I understand, the judge was the judge who was in charge of issuing the FISA warrants in the first place. He
has some sort of connection, and he has some connection to some cases that have litigated that issue. I think it's Boateng. That sounds right. The way he handled that plea colloquy told me he has no meaningful interest in seeing anything else happen. So there's 3 reasons why I believe it means the case is over, and they're not going to pursue any other criminal indictments against any high-profile people. Number 1 is timing. So the timing issue relates to whether or not it reminded me of the Clinton case 2016. So I was debating people in 2015, people like Andrew McCarthy, who writes at the National Review, and told people that if they didn't bring an indictment prior to December of 2015, there was no chance anybody high up in Hillary's ring was going to get indicted because they're not going to interfere in the election. And so once that didn't happen, also I had a very different view of James Comey than a lot of his apologists. There were a bunch of conservative establishment Republicans from prosecutors' offices, people like Andrew McCarthy, who were defending James Comey. So even Rush Limbaugh thought something was going to happen because these people were defending Comey. It was like, you guys are clueless still about what the W administration was really about and who James Comey is in particular, Robert Mueller as well. And so I knew, because of what I knew about Comey, I knew about the timing of the case. I knew about how you track cases. If you're serious about bringing criminal prosecution, you do it like Mueller did. You see search warrants everywhere. You see subpoenas everywhere. You see raids in people's houses and offices at difficult times. You see indictments quickly. You see indictments that can mount. You see indictments with crazy number of charges meant to coerce plea deals. When there is a plea deal, it has a massive broad-scale cooperation provision in it. The cooperation is called 5K1, which said, and the reason, as a prosecutor, what you want to do with a cooperating witness is you want to have a real guillotine on them. They will tell you to make sure the witness tells the truth. Defense lawyers would say to coerce them to lie in favor of the prosecutor. There's evidence for both in our prosecutorial history. But the nature of it is you want to prosecute, you want to say, hey, we're going to prosecute you with, say, something that faces a 20-year offense or a 10-year offense, but we'll give you a 5K1 agreement that says you agree to provide substantial cooperation. We'll delay your sentencing while all these other cases are prosecuted, so you get to stay out that whole time. And if we agree that you gave us substantial cooperation, we'll ask for a dramatic reduction, like Sammy the Bull Gravano got when he ratted out John Gotti, even though he admitted he committed 26 or 27 murders. So it's the same dynamic. You want leverage, because the leverage has to be extended criminal exposure, and then the carrot, that the stick is the expanded exposure. The carrot is the 5K1 agreement. So in this case with Durham, I had serious doubts about Barr. I think Barr's an institutionalist. I think he does recognize there are serious problems with what happened with SpyGate, but his history is to defend the institution, not to undermine it. So I think there was a part of him that he would only go so far as to try to clean up the institution's reputation, clean up the institution from within, but not so far as to actually damn the institution with prosecutions. And there are other giveaways with this. Tom Fitton has been having to fight tooth and nail for Freedom of Information Act requests related to Clinton and other Spygate-related issues. Barr's Department of Justice has been stonewalling him now for 2 years. Cheryl Atkinson, who was illegally spied on by the Obama administration, connected to some of these same complicit participants, has been fighting tooth and nail to get Freedom of Information Act and other information related to her suit. Barr's Department of Justice has been aggressively fighting that all the way through. If he was serious about doing something, he would be letting those cases move aggressively forward to develop third-party collateral pressure and independent information sources. He's doing just the opposite. Then the timing. There's been no subpoenas, no grand jury warrants, nothing, search warrants, nothing of any great consequence, because it is very hard, if those things were out there, for someone in my position not to find out about it, because it will touch somebody who will reach out to me just for general advice. So and DC can't keep a secret, and those people tell me anyway. I knew about what Mueller was doing almost right away, because I had people reaching out to me saying, if there's a subpoena for this, there's a search warrant for this, I've been put on a target list, I've been put on a subject list, I've been, et cetera. And it was massive. That dragnet was huge. If anybody was on a list that had been favorable to General Flynn, that Flynn had listed, and that still had any ranking position within government, they were targeted by Mueller. People would be shocked by the kind of people he tried to put targets on. So the Barr has not, there's been no evidence of that occurring at all. We're right up on the eve of an election. They're not going to bring an indictment in September and October. That's not their nature. And that means they're gambling that Trump wins, because if he loses, the case will clearly be closed down. So the fact they waited until the last minute with Kleinsmith, who, by the way, Horowitz referred as for criminal prosecution a long time ago. Horowitz already outed everything. There's some people that think Kleinsmith came forward. He didn't come forward. Horowitz outed and proved what he had done, that he deliberately doctored and fabricated a document for it to be going into the FISA record to lie about Carter Page's history. So that's problem one, is the timing, complete lack of activity, late indictment on Kleinsmith right on the eve of the election. All the other activities with Atkinson and Atkinson and Tom Fitton are further confirmation that Barr is not serious about actually bringing meaningful prosecutions. Problem number two is what happened in the plea arraignment. So and to put this in context for people, they had a smoking gun against everybody involved thanks to the Kleinsmith falsified email. It is almost impossible in any case to get evidence so clean, so clear, so easy, where you have the actual email that says Carter Page is a source, and then you have the doctored email where Kleinsmith typed in not a source, sent that in, it got put into the FISA application, and they have it all. They have the paper trail, the emails trail, the whole 9 yards. They have him dead to rights. They have a smoking gun. And what you want to do is you want to take that smoking gun, expand it to other potential areas of risk for Kleinsmith, and you go to Kleinsmith a year ago, not now, and you say, you're going to wear a wire, you're going to help out, you're going to assist, or we're going to put you in prison for 20 years because you have zero chance in front of a jury. And then you get that. You give him a deal that you could actually sentence him to at least 10 years. You give him a 5K1 agreement of a substantial cooperation, and you start having him rat people out and give the information. Because through that smoking gun, you get to unravel the whole thing. Because what it is you have that one big lie, that one easy to prove lie that discredits everybody in the process. Because what this lie was about was they tried to make Carter Page look like he'd been secretly meeting with Russian spies for over a decade, when in fact he'd been doing it at the behest of the CIA. They always had to lie about that, because that would have gutted their entire FISA, prevented all of their searches, prevented delegitimized the entire investigation, invalidated everything about the case, and put them all into serious trouble because they all signed off on it on the FISA application. And he could rat them all out. He could be the one to say, I got pressure from the supervisory special agent. And let's say that's apparently I'm told that the pronunciation is stroke. It's spelled like Strozik, but I got multiple comments on this. Also, people believe that the word pronunciate was not a word. My dear friends, it is. It is in the dictionary. Pronunciate is a word. You can put miss in front of it, and it can be a word. And if it's not a word, it should be.
And you know what I love? I love that you read the comments, Barnes, Robert, because everyone's like, yes, stroke. First of all, I believe his original name might actually be Strozik. Like that might be how it's actually pronounced. Who knows? Either way, it is good that you read the comments. And incidentally, by the way, the judge, I screenshotted this before. I don't understand the incestuous relationship. His name is Boasberg.
That's it. I knew it was something like that.
Boasberg also leads the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court that approved the Page wiretaps.
Isn't that
How is
magical?
everybody sleeping with each other here? It's like
it's all random assignment. The federal courts tell me that's what they always tell me. Oh, Mr. Barnes, this is a random assignment. When I get these kind of cases, I was like, yeah, it's like Venetian blinds. They always say you have a blind trust. So yeah, Venetian blind trust, the kind you can peek through when you need to.
Yeah, but it's crazy because you have the judge now who's going to sentence Kleinsberg, who is the one who has every incentive on earth now to say, Kleinsberg, you misled me. I had no idea that this was not as airtight as you presented it to me. It is everybody covering their own tushy as opposed
completely
to getting to the bottom of it.
Well, so this is the shock. So given the timing of it, what you look for in a Kleinsmith case, if they're going to go after other people, aside from the fact it should have been much, much earlier, is you look for a broader sentencing charge, number one. Number two, him admitting critically how material this was. And you try to get him to flip. What happened is you get him to say, Peter Stroke told me to doctor it. That I had told Stroke before that, yes, that in fact they had said he was a source. He knew that, but he told me we need something for the file that says it's not a source. I knew. And then you get Stroke to fold, and you go up the chain. And that way you get Sally Yates. That way you get Comey. That way you get everybody else. McCabe. That's how you get Lisa Page, etc. Instead, that very key fact is the one they allowed him to say wasn't true. So one, there's no extended criminal exposure. He's got no risk if he doesn't cooperate. He faces a normal probationary sentence. He will likely do less time than even George Papadopoulos did. Despite being one of the worst. He completely doctored a document, fabricated it, that was essential to the entire SpyGate campaign. They have it without doubt. They have him on text saying he's anti-Trump. He's part of the resistance, that he's afraid of what will happen to him because his, quote, name is all over the Trump paperwork. They have him dead to rights every which way but Sunday. And they let him plead to the lowest possible charge, agree to the lowest possible sentencing range, do not require any cooperation. There's a misunderstanding of the agreement, by the way. In the plea agreement, it says that he will be debriefed about FISA court protocols in general. That is not a cooperation requirement. That's just your generic. That's what you have to do all the time when you're on probation or you're on pretrial release post-sentencing or post-plea, but pre-sentencing. You have to cooperate with the government in that context. But that's just institutional. That's not a 5K1 cooperate against anyone else agreement. So there's no 5K1 agreement. There's no requirement that he cooperate in any meaningful way. There's no leverage they have over him because he can just go. He's going to get probation anyway. And then the big one, the shocking one, is that he basically went, by the way, I think he pled to not a crime. He went in and said that at the time he submitted that false document, he believed it was correct.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not a material lie then. How is that material? So the judge asked him about it. He took like a minute or two to react, and the judge recognized that he was pushing back, and he let him push back and say, well, at the time, I thought it was true. In other words, he's saying he thought he doctored the document to make it more accurate rather than less.
And there's a reason why no one trusts lawyers. I mean, this is, you knew that this would be the implausible defense or justification. I thought I was making it clearer by falsifying an email to which I was not a party when submitting it for a FISA warrant. I mean, it's a laughable excuse. It's a discrediting, laughable excuse. And yet people just gobble it up like, okay, that'll be it. Nothing to see here. Let's move on. And the judge now, who's the one who's going to, I guess, sentence him, is the one who was involved in issuing the FISA warrant in the first place. And he
accepted the plea. Well. And he accepted the plea. I was like, at that point right away, he had to stop the plea. I just did a plea hearing last week in which there was a whole bunch of facts in the statement of offense. And often they'll add a statement of offense to say, here's what we would have proven. My view is the defendant shouldn't have to say, yes, that's what you would have proven, because there's a certain, usually a subpart of that you factually agree with and a part that you don't factually agree with. And the judge, and when my client just pushed back a little bit because he was entitled to, because there's parts of that we're disputing, it's about the consequence and the intent level, not the facts themselves, if you will. It's why did he do something rather than the fact that it happened. Mm-hmm. The judge interrogated him right away and was going to stop the plea hearing unless he agreed to accept everything related to the statement of offense. Yet here you have a much more consequential case, and they're telling him, by the way, this has no consequence to the whole thing. that we just this was accidental. He thought he was right. He thought he was making it correct. So it could not have been, though there's no intent to materially lie in the FISA. And what that does is let everybody walk. Everybody now walks. How can he now say that Peter Strzok did something wrong by including it, or that Comey did anything wrong, or McCabe did anything wrong, or Yates did anything wrong, when he thought it was correct? When he thought including that fact made it more correct, when he doctored the email to make it right, supposedly. So he completely gutted every possible case against everybody, and it's not a coincidence that his lawyer broadcast that too, because they're letting everybody know everybody's in the clear. Everybody can walk. Everybody's going to skate. And by the way, when they send you're not a target, you're not a subject notice, there's people trying to dismiss the significance of that. Sorry, that's very consequential in this kind of case. So it is generally they refuse to give you those notices. So they often won't give you, even if you request as a defense lawyer, they won't give you a written notice that you're not a target or you're not a subject, because then the prosecutor's under entrapment and other potential allegations if your client goes forward with an interview and it turned out they in fact were a target or a subject. So when they told Brennan he's not a target and a subject, it's because he's not. They're letting him walk. And Brennan's people wouldn't put that out if it wasn't true. That would just be a dumb statement to release. The bigger, far more consequential thing was Kleinsmith saying, by the way, I've told everybody that I thought this was true and that everybody else thought it was true. So all of you are off the hook. The smoking gun has been completely suppressed. And it means Durham is going to, and by the way, for Durham's background, Durham was brought in on the Guantanamo case where the CIA illegally tortured people and then destroyed the evidence of it when investigation was open. Durham let every single person walk, didn't prosecute a single one of them, covered it up, buried it in a memo that was never even disclosed publicly. And so just because when he was brought in Boston to handle the Whitey Bulger corruption of the FBI office, Whitey Bulger FBI corruption had already been outed. He didn't out it. It had already been outed. He was sent in to contain the damage. That was not done to actually clean up the Boston FBI, in my view. Here's a key fact. He managed to protect Robert Mueller's connection to all of that. That was a cue that he was there to cover up and contain, not expose. So that's who Durham is, and he's doing the same things he did in the CIA case. I mean, John Brennan spied on the Senate. Well, that investigation was still supposed to be pending at some level, and nothing happened to him then either. So the CIA illegally spied on the Senate related to it and tried to go after people related to it. There's a whole documentary film and another film made about it. Though the guy involved, by the way, is Daniel Jones, who ended up cashing in and now has been spreading false conspiracies against Trump for the last several years. So what the lesson he learned from helping to try to blow the whistle was, I should be on the other side of this equation. I should be on the corrupt side because that's who gets rich and that's who gets protected and that's who gets to walk. If you're Steve Bannon and you try to help Trump and build a wall, you get criminally prosecuted and punished to the max for any tiny mistake you made, no matter how little, how small, how inconsequential, how unintentional. But if you're John Brennan and you've been lying for years and you've lied to the Senate repeatedly, lied to Congress repeatedly, helped set up and illegally spy on a president and falsify information to do it, you get to walk. Just like Clapper was going to walk, McCabe is going to walk, Comey's going to walk. I wish it were not true, but about 95% sure I'm right on this. Barr is going to turn out to be phony, and all talk, no walk.
One question a few people have asked, does Kleinsmith get disbarred? Does he face any disciplinary measures or probably not?
I know Mike Cernovich said that he thought he would, and Mike is right that normally that would occur. I do not have confidence that will occur here. So just take a look at who runs the bars. Almost every bar association in every state and every jurisdiction is run by people way to the left who weaponize it with ease. There's a reason why corrupt prosecutors never get hit, but politically controversial defense lawyers often suddenly are subject to investigation and inquiry.
Amazing. All right. And before the people come downstairs, because I hear the feed pattering around, we had one more subject to discuss.
Outcry. So I recommend everybody watch it. It's a Showtime show. It's a 5-episode season. Outcry is a term of art that's used for kids who have an outcry that an abuse incident happened to them. The most shocking part of it to me was one of the head people involved in the Innocence Project in Texas covered up her conflict of interest, which was why the defendant was railroaded into a wrongful conviction. And what's also still unsettling is that even Texas Rangers and high-ranking law enforcement officers still don't know how to prosecute a child abuse case. So I did a bunch of these when I was a kid. I'd never defended anyone on the other side. I've prosecuted them. but in a civil context. So I was representing victims of domestic violence seeking orders of protection, children and women. And there were no men, I don't think, that were victims. There were boys that were. And you learn in that process the fragility of childhood memory, the problem of suggestive nature of memories. Go back to the McMaster's case and other cases from the late 80s, early 90s, the daycare cases where they use bad methodologies. So you learn to filter out a good case versus a weak case. You learn how to look at evidence. You look at other patterns of behavior of the targeted individual. Also, still shockingly, you have a Texas Ranger, for example, that associates somebody interested in adult pornography and having adult affairs with child pedophilia of 5-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds. Those two, there used to be this old concept with older detective types. They associate, well, that sounds like perversion, son. So anything that sounded like perversion, they just thought all blend in. And it's like, look, somebody who's into adult affairs is not someone who's looking to abuse children. Children abuse is about power. It's just like sexual assault. It's a power abuse. Look for their motivation. Look for the motivation. You'll find the path of who's likely guilty. So look for someone that has major psychological issues. Look for someone who's driven by power. Look for someone who feels emaciated as an adult. There's a lot of these tells. I learned how to spot them and identify them about 6 months into my work for victims. And you learn how to, because the other thing is I was early on told by people, oh, every victim tells you the truth. And then I had a witness. I recognized my client was lying right on the stand, which is a bad time to figure out your client is lying, by the way. And I was like, oh, crap. And then you learn, okay, there's tons of motivations that go into these things. You got to filter out. Sometimes the person's telling the truth, but they're accusing the wrong person because of things that can happen. Real abuse victims can suffer memory damage, can suffer a whole bunch of other psychological issues. It can lead to drug and alcohol abuse, which can cause other issues with memory recall. So you have to be sympathetic while being honest. You can't lie to yourself and say every person who makes an accusation is telling the truth about that person and that incident. That's not the case. And the problem was because the victim rights movement kept telling judges that, judges stopped listening to actual victims because they would hear the victims' rights people say this person is telling the truth, figure out later they weren't. And then because they don't know how to distinguish the truth teller from the person who's either deliberately lying or sometimes just got it wrong. This can happen with kids frequently, particularly the younger they are. So you have to filter it out, have them tell the whole story, know how to connect the story, know how to relate to it, then look at the physical evidence, corroborative evidence, look at the story framework, look at the targeted individual. It was the worst investigation ever done. They railroaded this young kid, but the real key to the railroading of the young kid wasn't the bad police, wasn't the tunnel judgment of the wayward prosecutor. It was the defense lawyer who had a conflict of interest who hid the likely culprit the entire time from her own defense of her client, and then tried to railroad his attempts to get acquitted afterwards, after the trial in a habeas proceeding. And she's been held up as a prominent liberal lawyer, as a victim's rights, as a defendant's rights lawyer. So it's shocking and horrifying, but it's very educational. There is a pattern to knowing the difference between a likely true, likely not true child abuse and domestic violence case. I recommend people go out there and research that, because if it comes up in their own lives, they can learn how to filter it out. Somebody's coming to you with a story, you can learn how to okay, likely true or maybe not. You also can look for the risk points. My daughter, I gave her a book. She laughs about it, but because I think I bought her like 4 of them. But it's a great book called 25 Red Flags for Problematic Men. And it's very useful because it's associating psychological habits with a bunch of different types of guys that are problems. And it's things that you wouldn't necessarily know as consequential. You know, certain behavior towards cars, certain behavior towards fire, certain behavior towards parents, certain statements, certain behavior that you don't necessarily put together at the time. That's very useful to spot the red flags as objective metrics to know who's a problem and who isn't. So it's also a good case to remember that, because when you see a very traumatic victim, there's a tendency to want justice to such a degree that you lynch the innocent. So you got to make sure that you convict the guilty, because when you convict the innocent person, as important as that innocent person being railroaded, the guilty person is walking free and can do it again. And that's why it's very important to know the difference. And so I recommend that show. Very good, very well done. And shocking about how liberal, high-ranking criminal defense lawyers can betray their own clients for their own self-interest.
Amazing. I'm definitely going to watch it now. If we can get it, it's going to take us 5 evenings to do it at the very least with the kids. The Codester. This was the super chat I missed. I actually took a screenshot way back when, but it got lost. My mom's getting sued by an ex-employee for doing property inspections under AB5. I don't know what that is. Some business like Uber can't be run employee-based. Any thoughts or recommendations?
I'd have to take a look at it in further detail. So there's a lot of the different legal restrictions coming into. I believe that references Assembly Bill 5 under state of California. And there's a lot of provisions that are in controversy about that because that's what Uber and Lyft are currently litigating. They've appealed to the Court of Appeals about that. The Court of Appeals, interestingly enough, gave them the stay that the trial court refused to because they'll give Uber and Lyft credit. They said, "Oh, we're shutting down. Well, I guess we're not getting a stay. We're shutting down." In the Court of Appeal in the state of California. And the Court of Appeals is like, well, hold on a second. Maybe now we should reconsider the risks to this case, like the trial court should have. That's so political. California is a dangerous place to do. I'll be doing a interview with George Gammon later in the week about their crazy exit tax proposal, where they're going to tax you if you've ever lived in the state 10 years ago. They're going to track you down and take some of your wealth, take some of your assets, take some of your property. All these governments are in big trouble, so the regulatory restrictions are insane, and the rest. And so I'd have to look at that in further detail. So I will take a look at that, so we'll be able to answer that.
And incidentally, I'm going to have to add one of the other caveats to the super chat preamble. No, nothing legal advice. I mean, we can do it, and if Robert answers the question, all the better. But legal advice by super chat is only a door to a disaster. And
these are all open opinions, but they are not they do not form an attorney-client relationship.
Good. And what was the name of the book that you gave to your daughter?
The 25 Red Flags to spot, and it's like 25 red flags to spot. I forget the rest of it, but I actually used it in my legal practice. So it's great. It'll give you objective metrics. I use it if I'm ever around any of her boyfriends. I'm checking.
A book that is probably equally as good as John Ronson's The Psychopath Test, which is insightful, and it has a test which, if when you go through the test, which is the Bill Hare's psychopath test, you'll notice that you can think of people who have a number of those traits, and you'll know what you think of them when you think of it. Robert, we do this. This was another amazing stream. We were over 6,000 people live, which is magnificent.
Sweet.
So thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you for the super chats. I hope I got to, I try to get to as many non-super chat questions as well. Thanks for the support. Thanks for tuning in. Robert, stick around. We'll say our proper goodbyes. Probably do this next week. I'm going to have one boring week. I was telling everybody before you got here, I'm in a trial now as an impleaded third party. So I've got to sit for a week and do virtually nothing, take notes and pay attention, but this should be my last trial, promise. Everybody, thank you very much. Enjoy what's left of the weekend, and we'll see you in our videos. And Robert, I'll say goodbye to you in a second. Everyone, good evening.